Поздравляю весь личный состав всех воинских подразделений, принимавших участие в разгроме неонацистских формирований, вторгшихся на российскую территорию в Курской области. Авантюра киевского режима полностью провалилась, а понесенные противником огромные потери, в том числе и среди наиболее боеспособных, подготовленных и оснащенных, в том числе и западными образцами техники силами ВСО, а это штурмовые подразделения, спецназ, безусловно.
This speech by Putin was effectively given pointing out that the Kursk operation has been completely completed. Kursk has been liberated. 70,000 apparently Ukrainian troops have been killed in the process, some of their best that they used for this. I would like to point out, and I would like to point out strongly, CNN, many of the journalists in the United States, as they were reporting when Kursk first took place, they said, this is fantastic. Zelensky has embarrassed Putin. He has shown that they still have energy and drive in their military and that the Russians can't stop them. And this is a fascinating development that is effectively taking place. My humble opinion, not a general, not a military guy, none of those things, just a fantastic chess player. I said, this is an abomination. Yes, you humiliated Putin because you've invaded its territory. By the same token, all of these people are going to die, or all of these people are going to be pushed out. I forgot to add the point of captured. There was that. I was going with the assumption that they were going to die. And that is effectively what happened. It was more than 70,000 people killed. I forget, ungodly amounts of equipment basically wasted and lost. And you can make an argument that part of the reason that Russia has been able to push so hard on the front lines across the 2,000-kilometer front is because of the number of people that they lost in that fool's errand in Kursk. They did it under the idea that they were going to capture the nuclear power station. When that didn't take place, because they got bogged down almost immediately, the thought was, we need to hold every patch of land so when negotiations take place, we can exchange this land for negotiations. Putin came out angry and pointed out there will be no negotiations on Russian territory. Full stop. It will not happen. That is not something we're willing to concede or do. In which case, all of you are going to die or be pushed out. It took 6 months, might be a little bit more than 6 months, but around 6 months. And Putin is just, in this statement, that pretty much every television network covered, made the point brimmingly clear, this operation is complete. All of these people are dead, captured, or pushed out of Kursk. Now, while this was taking place, Ukraine started going after Belgorod. I would imagine under the same idea that they could capture territory in exchange for some of their own territory, which, again, was always a non-starter from the Russian point of view. I would like to say that I was completely right. I was completely right. Now, I do need to make a correction on something. I made the point of saying, and I said it, I misspoke, even though I was more right than not. In my video talking about Iran and a sinister turn in regards to those negotiations, I made the point that Marco Rubio has taken the lead in, I think I said negotiations. It's less negotiations. What I should have said was Marco Rubio has been more vocal than he had been prior. And his more vocal position in regards to these negotiations coincide with a hard line that the Trump administration has started to take on this notion of no nuclear enrichment at all, meaning you can't have any centrifuges or anything else. We would allow you, which is a fantastic thing, right? We're going to allow you to have nuclear power brought in, materials brought in for your nuclear power plants, but you cannot do enrichment. Now, going into these negotiations, it was understood that this was a red line, that Iran has said more than one occasion, this is not something we're willing to countenance. We are going to keep nuclear power. Now, the reason I pointed out a sinister turn is because in the very beginning, when Witkoff was the person doing a lot of the talking about it, especially on places like Sean Hannity, what Witkoff said was different than what Rubio is saying now. What Witkoff said was 3%, 3.6% enrichment. He gets attacked. And after he gets attacked, he backtracks on Twitter and says no nuclear centrifuges or anything like that, effectively the Libyan option of things. So this has been the line that the Trump administration has gone with now, and coinciding to that hard line, you get Rubio making the point very clear. On top of that, the technical team was headed up by this guy, Michael Anton. Now, Michael Anton is known in DC, and this. So right here, Michael Anton, who also worked for the former George W. Bush National Security Council and is former BlackRock managing director, is leaving after serving under Trump. Let's keep going. Michael Anton, a spokesman for the National Security Council, said that when Bush made the speech where there was other intelligence indicating Iraq had to acquire uranium from several countries in Africa, the information, however, was not detailed or specific enough to prove such contention, he said. Let's keep going. Because of this lack of specificity, this reporting alone did not rise to the level of inclusion of a presidential speech, Anton said. That said, the issue of Iraq's attempts to acquire uranium from abroad was not an element undermine the indictment reached by most intelligence agencies that Iraq was reconstituting its nuclear weapons program. So, hey, I'm not certain that they're getting uranium from Africa. I am pretty sure, though, as opposed to other intelligence agencies, that they're trying to get weapons, nuclear weapons. This is the same argument, by the way, that Donald Trump is going with in regards to Iran. They're trying to get nukes. They're trying to get nukes. We won't got to stop them from getting nukes. Mind you, he's doing this on behalf of a foreign country that has been invading multiple foreign countries, committing massacres daily. I think they killed 50 Palestinians yesterday, and has nukes of their own. Again, it's a bit rich. You're telling a sovereign country what they should and shouldn't do. But fair enough. I did get that one slightly askew. One last point. Something else I got wrong. General Gerasimov said something that blew me away, and I immediately sent him out with WTF. This. Right here. Now, to be fair, I've told you, I am just a man, and being just a man, I can get things wrong with the best of them. I can stomp my toe with the best of them. What he is noting is a thank you to the brave North Korean troops that was fighting on behalf of the Russians in the Kursk region. And the reason it was specific to the Kursk region was because of the security partnership between Russia and North Korea. Up to this point, there was no acknowledgement from either North Korea or Russia. There was not an acknowledgement or denial, and there was no evidence for it, short of Ukraine saying North Koreans are fighting, just like they're saying the Chinese are fighting. I cannot take Ukrainians reporting on stuff like this, especially if there's nothing to undergird what they're saying. Apparently, this turned out to be correct, however. RT is running it. He said it right here when he's effectively talking about it. And now there's apparently promo videos out with North Korean troops training with the Russians. Totally got that wrong. So, just a man. Stomp my toe with the best of them. And I could get things wrong like anybody else. It's fascinating. Fascinating. But again, they have a security partnership. So in the context of that security partnership, they were fighting in Kursk. From the standpoint of Russia incursion into Ukraine, they are not fighting, however. Not. The security partnership only goes up to Kursk because that's where they were invaded. I guess they're doing it legally, of all things. Mark will be on at 8:15. We'll have a discussion about it, what they're saying about it in Moscow, what they're saying about the Kursk operation, what it means This is a devastating setback, devastating loss and humiliation of man, materials. And it was something else. I was reading some of the interviews on this. It's not just the loss of man and materials. Russia has been able to recover all sorts of Western equipment and cart it back to Russia and learn how it works, use it for themselves on the battlefield, and get a good sense of NATO technology, NATO equipment on the battlefield. So it's not just a loss of man and materials, it's also a loss of intel. It's humiliating. It's a big setback. But what is not going to be a setback is my man, Carl Jha, who is awesome. You like that turnaround, that transition? Carl, my man, how you doing, man? You doing okay?
I'm doing great. How are you, Jamar?
I'm doing good. I'm doing all right. Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm not going to complain. I'm glad that you could join me, man. I always appreciate these conversations. I always learn something from you in these conversations. I want to hit two topics, maybe three. One, definitely the trade war. The second one has to do with Taiwanese independence and the Philippines. There is, in fact, let's go to the Philippines first since I have the video up. I might as well ask you about it. This video came out, and in the video, they point out this could lead to a major escalation in the Philippines. Now, I don't exactly know what they're saying, so I'm just going to show the flag that being raised over what they're calling, what is the name of it? It's not a shoal, it'll come to me in a moment. But that little patch of land.
Sandy K.
What is it called?
It's literally called Sandy K. Sandy, okay. like the sand beach. Yeah. Sandy K. Yeah.
Sandy K.
Sandy K. Okay. Reef.
So they have raised the flag over that area, and apparently the Philippines are pissed. Now, will the Philippines end up like Ukraine? It's probably the question that should be asked, right? Because there's no way the Philippines can, in any way imaginable, contest the Chinese.
Well,
what is going on with that?
Well, I mean, after watching Ukraine getting wrecked for 2 years, and Philippines still decides to plunge ahead and be the next proxy, I mean, there's nothing I can say about that. I mean, it takes extraordinary stupidity to follow the example of Ukraine. What we have in the Philippines is we have a group of oligarch families who have been controlling the politics of the countries for forever, pretty much, and before and after the end of American colonization of the Philippines. And right now, before we had Duterte, who for once piloted an independent foreign policy away from the United States, being improving ties with China, getting closer to Russia, but he's been punished for it. Right now, he's sitting in. Yeah. He got extradited. Yeah, right. He got extradited to ICC. Once again, proved that ICC is only for brown people. They're obviously not going to get Netanyahu. It's designed for the jungle, right? To get the brown people, not the white people or Netanyahu, people like that. So, I mean, that was an act of revenge by the United States, basically, to make Duterte an example for anybody who kind of defied U.S. hegemony. And so now we have Mama Marcos, who has been towing the U.S. lines. Not the least reason is because his daddy's ill-gotten fund, something to the tune of more than $30 billion, is being frozen by United States. If he ever want to see any of that, he will have to be in the good grace of U.S. government. And so here we are. Philippines, China, they used to have a gentleman's agreement back in 2014. That was even before Duterte's term. And we just says, okay, we'll put aside our differences. China will allow the Philippine Navy to continue to supply their half dozen Marines stranded on a reef, provided that they do not bring building material, trying to do land reclamation project and try to harden the military bunkers, etc. But of course, Marco claims he had no prior knowledge of such agreement, and he's being, he's making Philippines a linchpin of U.S. Strategy in South China Sea to provoke China, and this is China's response. What China did, that was China's response. So you have first Tony Blinken went over to the Philippines and said, we have an ironclad commitment to the Philippines, including South China Sea. And then you have the latest Trump Secretary of Defense, Pete, whatever his name is, went to the Philippines, said the exact same thing. We have ironclad commitment to the Philippines. Well, China says, well, okay, let's see what you mean by that. Here is a reef. So here's a reef. We're gonna put our flag on it. And so first of all these islet or natural features in the Philippines, they have been in dispute for over half a century. The Philippines entered into the dispute around 1950s when a Filipino businessman claimed that he quote unquote discovered the Spratly Islands, and then he actually founded his own republic, and then Philippine government officially tried to buy him out in the 1970s. So that's how this. Whereas China has always claimed these islands, since the Qing dynasty. So this is how the dispute got started. But what's important about that Sandy Cay is it's a natural feature, and it sits just barely above the sea level during the high tide. So that's actually an important point, because when it's a natural feature that sits above the sea level during high tide, according to the United Nations Law Convention of the Sea, the country who controls such a feature are entitled to a special economic zone 200 nautical miles around that feature. So China is like, okay, we are putting our flag here. What are you going to do, United States? You claim you have ironclad commitment. You are goading Philippines on. Let's see what you got. I mean, I don't think U.S. will not do anything besides their rhetoric, because U.S. plan for the Philippines has always been, this is our excuse to pivot back to Asia, to get access to the 9 Filipino bases we already have access to, and to put the Typhoon missile on the Philippines where we can threaten China, because the range of Typhoon missile is such that it covered much of the southern China. And initially they said, oh, we just brought those Typhoon missile here for our joint exercise. We'll take them away after exercise is over. Well, that was last year. Those Typhoon missiles are still there in the Philippines. And so they're not going away anytime soon. And then Filipino government actually said, oh, we actually think about buying them from the US. But just like how the missiles were operated in Ukraine, those missiles are not going to be operated by the Filipinos. They're going to be still operated by US servicemen, except Trump is going to make the Filipinos pay for it, right? He's going to, Filipino are literally paying for the privilege of stationing U.S. troops on their soil and hosting U.S. missiles. Whether that's going to blow up into a hot kinetic war, I highly doubt it, especially after the development of the last few weeks. I'm talking about the tariff war, because at this point, I said this on Twitter. It caused a big ruckus. I said, U.S. has neither the balls nor the means to start a hot war with China right now, because it's pretty obvious when China is making everything, including the vital parts that Pentagon needs to keep its military-industrial complex running. How the heck are you going to do a hot war? And by the way, a lot of Americans haven't felt the true impact of the tariff war yet, because someone pointed out on Twitter, Mosen Hart, he's American doing importing educational toys from China. He said it takes 30 days for the ship to cross the Pacific from ports of China to the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. So what happened on April 30th is there's a steep drop in ships leaving ports of China heading to U.S. there's a 30 days gap. So this disruption in the supply chain won't hit Port of LA and Long Beach until May 10th. In a couple of weeks. And in a couple of weeks, things are going to be really bad because we're going to have truckers basically out of work in the West Coast, and it's another 50 days for New York. So New York on the East Coast, they're going to hit a little bit later. They're going to see the effect in the late May, early June. So this summer is going to be really, really bad unless. I think it's too late. I was going to say unless Trump roll back the tariff right now, but I realized no, that's too late because remember there's still a 30 days gap. So even if the Chinese supplier says, okay, let's let bygones by bygones, we will continue to produce. We pretend nothing bad happened. We'll continue to send our order to ship to you. Guess what? It takes another 30 days. So this summer is shot. This from May to June is going to be really, really bad in the United States. This is equivalent of Trump doing a shock therapy, Gorbachev style, but except in US. And we're going to see, empty shelves. People don't realize 80% of antibiotics used in the United States is produced in China. A lot of the medical equipment
I did not know
hospital use. A lot of medical equipments, medicines that's used in hospital come from China. This is going to have serious issues. We talked about the tariff war before. I said tariff could be useful to help your domestic manufacturing if you have domestic manufacturing in place. If you don't have the supply chain, what the heck are you going to do, in the time span that you need to actually set up the supply chain? It takes a few years to build out a complete supply chain. I'm being very optimistic here, a few years. I mean, in some industries, it will take probably decades. China took 40 years to get where they are now. They built out their supply chain in the last 40 years. Trump is not going to get that done in a few. What he said 90 days. What he said 90 days.
With Russia, by the way, they had to build out their supply chains. Like it took them a while to get insulated from the sanctions. It wasn't overnight. And just to back you up on this, empty shipping. That's one of the interesting things that I was reading about. Like how imports were down like 60%. Then there were like empty ships. Apparently, Walmart, Target, all of these places went to China, went to Trump saying, "Hey, what are you doing? You're killing us." There were even situations where the question is Walmart, Target, and some of these places going to pay for it themselves? Like, are they going to take the hit for the cost and just pass it to the consumers because their business model relies on Chinese imports? It's going to be a mess. You're absolutely right.
This is why we have seen some walk back from Trump, right? I mean, he got a call. He got a call from Tim Cook of Apple, right? Like Apple, it's like, what the hell are you doing? Flapping import. That means our iPhone can't get to the US. So he's like, oh, okay, sorry, my bad. I'm gonna put an exemption on electronics. So now what Apple is gonna do is they're gonna shift just enough. The plan to shift just enough iPhone production to India, so Americans will get special made in India iPhone, while the rest of the world will continue to get the iPhone made in China. So because India already makes, they already make about anywhere from 15 to 20% of iPhone in India. So their goal is to make 26% of their iPhone in India, and that will just be enough to supply the US market only. But again, how is that bring manufacturing job back to the United States? That shit just shifted the production from China to India. Why are these Trump supporters celebrating that as a big win? You're not getting those manufacturing jobs back, and you're just getting made in India iPhones. That's all you're getting.
Oh, that's so silly, and you're so right. Because, it's like the entire point of the sanctions, according to Trump, was we're going to bring manufacturing back to the States. Okay, well, you're doing jobs in India. Does that make India great again, right? It's supposed to make America great again. Oh, man. By May 30th, June, oh, man, it's going to hit. All hell is going to break loose.
It's going to be bad.
That is going to be
it's
bad.
gonna
That is going to be very bad.
I mean, this
What
is
is the
why
Chinese reaction to this,
the
by the way?
market is. Well,
Oh no, please
Chinese
finish.
reaction has been. The Chinese reaction has been pretty. They're just carrying on doing what they're doing. Xi Jinping is not going to make that call. Xi Jinping is busy traveling throughout Southeast Asia because China has been preparing for this moment since 2018, since the first Trump administration, the first Trump term, started slapping sanction on China, and that was a wake-up call for China. That was a big shock. Somebody has said if back in 2018, if Trump had coordinated with quote-unquote European allies and put the squeeze on China, there might be a chance. There might be a chance to force China to make a concession. But now it's too late. That ship already sailed, because China was in 2018 when the first Trump sanction was levied against China. China got a wake-up call, and since then, and you have Biden doubling down on the chip sanctions. China has been de-risking, decoupling from United States, and they already saw that as a eventuality. This is why they're not too bothered about this. They have already prepared for this decoupling from the United States. That's why Xi Jinping is traveling to Southeast Asia, because Southeast Asia, ASEAN countries are now China's largest trading partners, replacing the United States. This is what China has been doing. China, at one point, China's export, export counted 32% of China's GDP at a certain point. But now export only accounts for 19% of China's GDP.
Yeah,
which is comparable to countries like Germany, even lower than Germany and Japan. And out of that 19%, only 15% goes to United States. So if you do the math, it comes out 3%. 3% of China's GDP is directly tied to export to United States. And China said, you know what? It's okay. We can take a hit. We can redirect. We can redirect those. And you know what? Trump administration keep on saying they need our money. We have the upper hand because they need our market. We need our money. Well, guess what? Money is fungible, right? Government can literally print money, and China has been holding off on doing stimulus. During the burst of real estate bubble, all the foreign investors are screaming at the Chinese government, say, you need to do stimulus now. You need to stimulate the economy. But Chinese government didn't do that. They didn't do like a bailout like what the U.S. did to the big banks after 2008 financial crisis. So that means China has kept its powder dry. Now, if they want to do stimulus, they have room to maneuver. They could do stimulus, and also, this is what people don't understand. And there's also other markets that China can sell their product to.
right there.
Now, today, I need to remind people, China's middle class have reached 400 million people. That's larger than the entire population of the United States. And if you look at the China's economic indicators, China's electric generation is twice the amount of United States. They generate twice as much electricity as United States. If you look at the car market, China is the world's largest car market right now. They sell twice as many cars in China than they do in the United States. So I don't believe that the nominal GDP crap anymore that says China's economy is still smaller than the United States. I don't believe that. I mean, by all indications, I even think the PPP accounting, the purchase power parity accounting, which says Chinese economy is about 1.5 times the size of the United States, I think that's even too conservative. I think we're looking at China right now. It's probably about twice the size of the U.S. economy. If you look at the power consumption and the car market and any kind of the consumer market in China, so China has right now. There's going to be hard times, I'm sure. Chinese government is going to ask the Chinese people to make sacrifice. But whereas in the past, sacrifice means tighten your belt, ration your food. Today, making sacrifice means, okay, you need to get an extra phone. You need to buy one more car. You need to take a vacation.
It's like George Bush during the Iraq War. He was like, "Go out and buy stuff. Go out and buy stuff."
Exactly.
I saw, and to your point about money is fungible, or they can maneuver their markets elsewhere. Soybeans coming from Brazil, they've stopped buying pork. Apparently, hitting farmers. I mean, they canceled their order. And again, we're talking about 1.5 billion people. Like the power generation stuff, it should be. I mean, like logically, you're talking about 1.3 billion people compared to 300 million. You guys are 3 times, or China's 3 times the size of the US anyway. So you would imagine as scale goes up, well, obviously they're going to have more electricity. They need it. More cars, they need it. The market, by definition, will have to be bigger, especially if you're talking about a larger burgeoning middle class. So that's something that's going to grow in general. I mean, so I don't doubt you because of how big China is in that sense and how big of an industrial base that they have, bringing all of those people out of poverty. That is amazing. I think we are in for a rude awakening. And look, even the papers here, the Wall Street Journal talks about how Trump has lost the war, the trade war to China. So it's not just, like, I put it this way. Xi Jinping seems to be very calm. What's coming out of China is calm, resilience, resoluteness. What is coming out of the White House is a panicky, unclear strategy, like they just stumbled into a trade war. And it's almost as if they had no expectation that China was going to act this way. It's so bizarre. In their mind, China was just going to be like,
the Japanese delegate that came to Washington to do a deal that asked the Trump team, okay, what do you guys want? And the Trump team said, what do you have on offer? And the Japanese delegate were completely perplexed. They're baffled. They're like, we came to Washington to find out what you really want so we can find ways to accommodate you. And you came back and asking us what we want? It's like, it almost seems like you don't know what you really want. And this is why the Japanese trade delegations then left without reaching any kind of agreement, because they don't really know what the hell is going on. And this is why when the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, when he said, this is actually, we're playing 3-dimensional chess. We laid a trap for China. We told people, if you don't retaliate, you'll be rewarded. And now all the other countries are going to be rewarded and come to deal with us. And we're going to form we're going to tell them not to do business with China. And Japan just publicly said, we're not going to do that. We're not going to sign on any anti-China economic trade bloc because our relationship with Beijing is too important. And this is Japan. This is Japan who, in the past, always go along with whatever U.S. says. Japan is like the good pupil of the United States, right? Like they always follow. If Japan now stood up and said no to United States, that means no country is gonna follow. No country is gonna follow suit now. We're gonna say, okay, let's make a deal. Let's not trade with China, especially when a lot of their countries, many of the countries around the world, their supply chain also depend on China. If they want to do manufacturing inside their country, I'm talking about Southeast Asian countries, where I'm right now, Vietnam, Indonesia. If they want to develop their manufacturing sector, guess what? They need to import machine tools from China. They need to import parts from China. And they're already part of the Chinese supply chain. And United States is asking them to cut themselves off without offering anything in return. They're not coming in to say, okay, here's shitloads of money. That's gonna be enough to compensate you for cutting yourself off from China. Now, United States is not doing that. It's all sticks. It's like, okay, if you don't do what we say, we're gonna put tariffs on you, right? There's no carrots, 0 carrots. Whereas China's like, hey, we don't care if you want to trade with United States, it's fine. We actually prefer that you continue to trade United States. So, you can take our parts, make these things, and you can export to United States. We're fine with that. In fact, we're very happy with that. And this is why Xi Jinping is in Southeast Asia. He's shoring up these relationships, and he's getting red carpet treatment in Vietnam, in Thailand, in Malaysia, and right now we literally have Chinese military, Chinese People Liberation Army Honor Guard, marching in the streets of Vietnam right now as part of the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. And they're singing Vietnamese patriotic songs, about as if the Uncle Ho is with us on the march to victory, right? And they are getting a hero's welcome by the Vietnamese. I mean, there are videos right now out now, like, you have these Vietnamese women lining up when the PLA honor guard is marching, and they're yelling, 老公, 老公 in Chinese, which means husband.
Wow.
These guys are getting catcalled. This is Vietnam we're talking about. This is
this is not even China.
This is some people in Washington thought they could turn Vietnam as some kind of a, to counterbalancing against China. They wanted Vietnam as a cornerstone of the contain China policy, and like Vietnam and China, and Vietnam also they publicized for the first time the role of Chinese military during the Vietnam War. The fact that China actually sent 300,000 PLA soldiers into North Vietnam during the Vietnam War, and they were manning the air defenses to guard all the bridges and railways that was connecting North Vietnam with China. That's why, despite American carpet bombing, they were never able to cut those vital supply lines that linked China to Vietnam, because
nobody knew about this before. Just so clear, nobody knew.
People in the West don't know about this, and Vietnam, because their past difficulty with China, they didn't want to publicize this domestically, and now they're openly publicizing this. This is a big signal. This is a big signal shift. Vietnam, they are, they're like, okay, we're okay now. We're patching up our relationship with China, and Malaysia, they're rolling big red carpet for Xi Jinping, and Malaysian Prime Minister and Singapore's ministers, they're all criticizing Trump tariff at this point. Malaysia and Singapore, there's, especially Singapore. Singapore is supposed to be like the kind of Western outpost in Southeast Asia, and yet they are now criticizing Trump policies. So Trump is, you know how I on your show, I used to say the Asian century is already here today. Well, Trump saw that and he said, Jamar, F that. F the Asian century. We're going to bring in the Asian millennium. Start now.
Wow, I was in Vietnam during one of those celebrations I think it was 2 years ago, 2023. I was taking my vacation, and just so happened it was during the Vietnamese celebration of winning the war. And they were like marching down the street. They were singing, because they call it Saigon. They never call it Ho Chi Minh in the country. Like, we were called Ho Chi Minh City, and they're like, no, this is Saigon, the way they talk about it. So, no, that's pretty amazing. Wow. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Yeah, Trump screwed up on this. I mean, he pissed off Europe. And so apparently, and correct me if I'm wrong, Europeans or the European Union is supposed to go and visit China, or at the very least have a summit with China in May. Is that correct? Did I get that right?
EU is currently negotiating with China on removing tariff barriers between EU and China. These are the things that Biden administration worked very hard to pressure the Europeans to do. For example, putting the tariff on Chinese EVs, and now they're talking about, what? Just kidding. I don't think I think we don't need the tariffs on the Chinese EVs.
Oh, this is such an unmitigated mistake. I mean, he is effectively, because from his point of view, all right, now I'm in a trade war with China, and I'm waiting for a phone call from China that will never come, right? Waiting for a train that never comes. And then he's like, all right, China's not giving me a call. Okay, let me work with the Europeans. Now, keep in mind, he's sent Vance over there to browbeat the Europeans. Vance has been on TV telling Europeans, I don't care what you think about Greenland, we're taking it. Like, so he has been marginalizing, emasculating Europe for the entire 3 months. And now it's like, we need to work with the Europeans to go after China. And Europe is like, maybe we want to talk to China. And again, Southeast Asia, same thing. Like, you're pissing off the world. And then you're expecting the world to join you to go after China, who is not going after the rest of the world with tariffs. I mean, those tariffs are supposed to reinstate.
And even Canada.
Even Canada.
And even Canada.
Even Canada.
Even Canada. Like
he keeps calling the first state.
The whole Five Eye network worked really hard, in Canada, claiming there's Chinese interference in Canadian connection, secret Chinese police station on Canada and all that. They whip up a whole, China scare for like few years. And now they're like, you know what? China is not so bad, compared to United States. And what happened? You know what happened? China has announced that they're going to, because of tariff, they're going to stop taking LNG and oil shipment from United States. China actually buys a certain amount of liquefied natural gas and oil from United States. They say, you know what? We're not coming to US anymore because Trump is slapping a port fee on any Chinese-built ships. They could be potentially getting $3 million port fee for every Chinese-built ship that calls on U.S. port. So China's like, you know what? Our LNG ships, they're not coming to the U.S. to take your LNG shipment. We're just going to go a little bit further north. We're just going to do it from Canada. So now Canada is making bam bucks selling LNG to China. And China stopped buying beef from United States. And guess who benefits? Australia is now doubling is increasing their beef export to China. So everybody's benefiting right now. Like someone pointed out, right now you can build a factory anywhere in the world and getting components and parts from China without 145% tariff anywhere in the world but United States.
That's right.
So US. So if you really think about it, how that works out, you actually put the U.S. industry in a distinct disadvantage because they're the only ones who are going to have to pay 145% tariff if they want to source any Chinese parts. Which, by the way, Detroit Big Three, a lot of the Chinese parts go into the cars made in United States. People don't realize that, but they do, especially the batteries, because China dominates the battery production. And this is why, Trump is probably getting calls left and right now. It's like, okay, boss, you need to cool off on this tariff thing. Maybe like, just delay a little bit, give us some time. I think what Trump could do, he can just cave, but claim victory. A lot of the Trump supporters are going to believe him anyway.
How?
A lot of Trump supporters are going to believe him no matter what.
I mean, but how do you claim victory in this situation? Like, because everything you said is right. Everything you said is right. And it's a tax on Americans. Like, there was a reporting that Walmart was contacting Chinese businesses saying, hey, you need to cut your prices because of the tariffs. And of course, it's like, no, we're not doing that. Figure it out. Like, Walmart has made a business model selling Chinese products. So is Target. So is Amazon. He has screwed them over royally. And as you pointed out, all of those other supply chains, pork, Boeing airplane parts, soybeans. So Trump in the first term was paying farmers, effectively compensated them because the 1.3 billion people that they were selling to was basically off the table from that point on. Think of 1.3 billion people who pork. Again, the U.S. farmers screwed over, Boeing jets screwed over, Amazon, Target, Walmart, any of those type of businesses screwed over, 145%. Meaning either they mark that up and give it to the American consumer where they have to pay that on that product, whatever that price is, or they just don't sell that product, in which case you get empty boats.
The whole trade war not only was unnecessary, but it was based on false premises because they were looking at Trump was saying, "Oh, there's a huge trade deficit we have with China, right?" But they're looking at the trade figures basing on the import-export figures. Well, guess what? When the iPhone gets exported from China to United States, that counts as China's export to U.S. But in reality, China only makes about $60 off every iPhone. Majority of the iPhone profit get captured in Apple. So and also GM, and also Apple. Apple consistently was selling about 70 million. They make $70 million in revenue in China every year, and those revenue do not get counted in the import export because those iPhone never left China. It just went straight from Chinese factories into the Chinese consumer hands. So those iPhone sales did not get counted in the trade surplus or trade deficit figures. And some people did a calculation. The S&P 500 companies, the big American multinationals, they actually make about $1,100 billion worth of revenue from China, which dwarfs the amount of the direct export U.S. export to China. Because you have GM. Remember GM from 2009 all the way up to 2023. GM was selling more cars in China than they sell in the United States. But those cars do not get accounted into the trade figures because they are made in the GM factories in China and sold to the Chinese consumers. So GM was rolling in the profit for years, from 2009 to 2023. They're only getting killed more recently because of the Chinese competition. But for the longest time, they're making stupid bucks in China. Yeah. This goes with a lot of American companies. But again, their profit, their revenue do not get accounted for in the trade figures because they never leave ports of China, right? Because they're made in Chinese factories and they go into the Chinese consumer hands. But except bulk of that profit, just like Apple, they get captured by U.S. multinational and get distributed to their shareholders and their employees back in U.S. to support the research and development back in the U.S. And
so silly.
Trump is basically giving all that up. Trump is giving all that up right now.
It's so silly. I mean, it's so silly because you're absolutely right. Many of those are American companies, and even services aren't counted in the way that he is coming up with these figures. This is just a show of dominance. From the Chinese point of view, why do they think he's doing this? Has Chinese media talked about it, given analysis on what they think his motivation is? And do they think there's a larger motivation? Because I will tell you, there's some people who make this argument that Trump is trying to insulate the United States, meaning the two strands of thought. One strand is, okay, what Trump is saying is actually what he's trying to do, that he wants to create and foster American business. And the way he thinks about doing it is increasing the prices on Americans. So when you buy a particular product, you're buying an American product, and that company that makes that product is paying a particular wage, and that wage has to support an American worker, and so the prices have to be higher. And so by definition, he needs to drive up prices for American consumers. Now, he's not increasing the minimum wage. He's not doing anything to ensure those factories get built. He's not increasing the workforce and the education of that workforce to be able to do that job. And when you ask Americans, God, this poll was fascinating to me. They asked Americans, do you believe we should have more factories in America? 80% says yes. Would you want to work in a factory? 20% says yes. It's like, okay, so we want somebody else to work in a factory, but we want more factories, right? The logic doesn't quite work. And
it's that David Chappelle skit. I don't know if you've seen that David Chappelle skit. Mm-hmm. He actually, this was back 2018, I think, the first Trump term. He said, look, what the hell is Trump doing, man? I want to wear Nikes. I don't want to make Nikes,
right?
I don't want to spend $9,000 for my iPhone. Right. That's crazy. That's stupid talk. Just let the Chinese make iPhone and Nike for us.
So what do they think? The other strand of thought is Trump is preparing for a conflict, and in doing so, in the same way that Europe effectively was deindustrialized, because of the conflict with Russia, that he wants to barricade America from Chinese imports in order to ensure that if there's a conflict or a war, that we're not adversely affected. Where does China fall in this? What is the analysis in China on the reason that Trump is doing this? Is it just stupidity, or is there a larger five-dimensional chess?
by the way, what you said, this was actually the Pentagon talk points for a long time. The Pentagon says, well, our economy is too enmeshed with China. In case of war break out Taiwan, this is going to hurt us. If there's too much economic entanglement. So Pentagon has always been pro containment and pro decoupling, because their idea is, okay, once we cut through all these messy interdependence, it will be a lot easier for us to concentrate on war fighting against China. We don't have to worry about blowbacks, right? And but again, that's crazy talk. Right now, I don't think a hot war is going to break out anytime soon between U.S. and China. China is not interested in that. U.S. just lacks the means to do that right now. I mean, look, especially looking at the events, how it unfolded in the last few weeks. So from the Chinese perspective, I mean, they are looking at this as United States trying to roll back China's progress. The United States is like trying to keep China down. I mean, this has been the dominant view since 2018, when Trump first started sanctioning on China. Many Chinese saw that is the United States is worried about its position as a hegemon in the world, and they don't want China to continue to rise, so they want to keep China down. This is why, like a lot of the Chinese internet actually, like, they're creating funny memes about this, right? They call it, the one of most popular meme is Trump is actually a secret Chinese spy. He was his main mission is to sabotage America, and he's doing a great job. And the other meme, they call him Trump the nation builder, except the nation in question is China, right? Trump is making China even greater. And so far, I can't say they're wrong about that. I mean, the event in the last few weeks, you actually saw the world public opinion of China have risen in the last a couple of months. And this is all because of Trump. This is all because of Trump policy. And the whole thing is, like I said before, Jamar, a lot of the American problem with American empire is self-inflicted. I mean, this tariff war was totally unnecessary. And I mean, I was
just gonna say they're fearful. They're freaked out. I think Trump, from his point of view, is they feel the breath on their neck, and they fear this kind of empire decline. And this is his response to it.
There's one very respected figure in the public intellectual in China who is specializing in international geopolitics, called Professor Zhang Weiwei, I think from Fudan University in China, in Shanghai. He said Trump actually, in many cases, correctly diagnosed the problem with the U.S. empire system. It's involved in too many endless wars. It's wasted a lot of resources and its international standing on pursuing those wars. This is why he tried to wind down Ukraine. And Trump also realized, there's a serious problem with deindustrialization in America. That's why he's trying to bring the industrialization, to reindustrialize America. Except all the solution Trump provided just make everything much, much worse. Worse than if he hasn't done anything. And so this is a Chinese public intellectual view of the Trump policies. And I think it's pretty spot on. I mean,
incompetence.
Rank incompetence. But you know what? There's another view, Jamar, because there were on Twitter, especially, people when the Trump announced Liberation Day, there are a lot of people saying this is actually 4D chess, because because what Scott Bison is trying to do, the Treasury Secretary, he knows that the bond, there's $9 trillion of U.S. Treasury that's maturing this year. The U.S. had to pay back, but U.S. obviously don't have the money, so they need to borrow more money to settle the old debt. But what they're trying to do is intentionally crater the stock market So all the money from the stock market will have to flow to safe haven, which is the U.S. bond. That will bring the bond yield down, bring the interest down. So when U.S. goes to borrow money end of the year to pay the old debt, U.S. will borrow money with lower interest rate. Well, guess what? That didn't pan out because the
Wait.
market
Say that one more time. Say that one more time.
Okay,
You lost me.
So right now we all know U.S. have like what
36
37
trillion
trillion
in debt.
dollars,
Yeah.
37 trillion dollars of national debt. But this is like a rolling debt. Every year, some old debt come mature and you have to pay, right? So this year, there's about $9 trillion worth of U.S. Treasury that's coming mature. The U.S. government have to pay. Of course, U.S. government don't actually have the money. So what they do is they go to the bond market, issue more bonds to borrow new money to pay off the old debts, right? So the idea of Scott Bison's genius idea, 4D chess, is that he will push the interest rate down by crater the stock market. So all the money leaves the stock market, and normally where they go into the U.S. dollar, go into cash, or they go into the U.S. Treasury. And when that happens, when the money rushes to buy U.S. Treasury, it brings the yield or the short-term interest rate down, right? It will bring the interest rate down. So when U.S. goes to borrow those money to pay off its old debt, U.S. will be paying, lower interest rate on its debt. So that was a genius plan, except that didn't work.
That's why he's been yelling at Jerome Powell. That explains why he's been screaming at Jerome Powell.
Exactly. This is why as soon as they saw the bond market, it was broken, that there was panic selling of U.S. bond, and that actually pushed the interest up rather than down. That's why Trump start backtracking a lot of these tariff issues, because they realize, okay, their magic is not working, and this is probably brought up by themselves because a lot of sellings from Japan, and because they're putting a lot of pressure on Japan. And what happened was that actually made the Japanese yen go up, and the Japanese interest rate is going up. And for 20 years, Japanese is the first one who did the quantitative easing since their bubble burst in the 90s. So they have been printing a lot of money. They have very low interest rates. So all these hedge funds, they thought, wow, what a great idea. If we borrow shit tons of money in Japanese yen and invest in the US dollar denominated asset, we can get higher yield. We eat the difference. Well, it all works out until it doesn't. When the Japanese interest rate goes up, yen goes up, all these hedge funds realize, holy shit, now we owe way more than we just borrowed. Now we have to pay our debts. And the only way we do that is sell US treasuries. And that that blow the Scott Bison's plan out of the water. And this is why we are in the shit show we are right now.
Speaking of Scott, Trump's Treasury Secretary, he really wants to help China out. He really wants to do you a favor. And he comes out with, as to be the biggest balls, like tremendously large testicles to make this speech. And I was sitting here like, I cannot believe he's making the speech. Like, he's effectively saying, we want to help China. The United States is really just trying to look out for China. We're trying to be a good neighbor to China. And we want to help them correct their economy and correct the way their model of economics in China. He literally says this in the speech. And I want to get your take on this. I was like, the balls on this guy. Like, you are literally having a trade war with China as we speak. And everybody knows that the United States is freaked out about China's potential economic dominance, all up to the point where Obama is trying to pass the Trans-Pacific Partnership in order to attack and go after China economically. And the Trump administration has been trying to do the Asian pivot for God knows how long, but he's stuck in Ukraine, so he can't do it, right? And so his plan is trade war against the world. Okay, listen to what he says here. And like I said, I want to get your take. This is fantastic.
China in particular, is in need of a rebalancing. Recent data shows the Chinese economy tilting even further away from consumption toward manufacturing. China's economic system, with growth driven by manufacturing exports, will continue to create even more serious imbalances with its trading partners if the status quo is allowed to continue. China's current economic model is built on exporting its way out of its economic troubles. It's an unsustainable model that is not only harming China, but the entire world. China needs to change. The country knows it needs to change. Everyone knows it needs to change, and we want to help it change because we need rebalancing too. China can start by moving its economy away from export overcapacity and towards supporting its own consumers and domestic demand. Such a shift would help with global rebalancing that the world desperately needs.
This is absurd.
God,
China has 1.3 billion people. And the notion that the overcapacity, yes, they're supplying it to the world. I think he's talking about 5% of the world, which is just the United States. You give me your take. It's like everybody knows, all 5% of us, that China needs to change.
This is like the gaslighting to the max, you know. He just I mean, look, he's talking about, you know, making benefit the consumer. You know what benefits the consumer? Have to be able to buy a $12,000 brand new car. You know, that's what you can do in China right now. I was in China. You can buy a very nice car for $12,000. You know, and for $24,000, you can get cars that feels premium. You know, have tons of features that's not available in, you know, cars you get in the United States. This is what is doing good for the consumers. But, you know, the problem with Scott Bessent he doesn't know China, and the information he's getting about China is from the likes like Gordon Chan, right? Who has been saying China is collapsing since like 2001. Coming collapse with China, happening any day now, you know, maybe just next year around the corner. And this is why he's saying think like China is trying to export out of its problem. That's not what's happening. You know, China built up its productive capacity over the last 40 years, and right now they're I mean, the whole idea of somehow China is subsidizing its industry to dump on the overseas market, it's kind of ridiculous. It's like, look, if you think Chinese government is subsidizing those products they sell to America, then if you want to really hurt China, you need to buy more. So, you know, because Chinese government is not a bottomless pit of money, right? You know, they cannot keep this going forever. You know, you just make them produce, you know, dump more, make them subsidize even more. You will break the bank. That's what, you know, Scott Bessent actually did when he worked for George Soros fund. You know, when they bet against the British pound sterling, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, but you know, back in 1997, 1998 Asian currency crisis, the George Soros funds, for which Scott Bessent worked for, they went after Hong Kong dollars. And at that time, China put its foot down. It's like, okay, we are the new landlord of Hong Kong now. We were not allowed you to do this. And they put their foot down and defended Hong Kong dollars. And George Soros funds lost shit tons of money. So I think they never forgave China for that. No. And this is like their kind of revenge, except he's running the US government like he's running a hedge fund. And this is why we're in the big mess we are right now.
Carl, man, you're awesome. That's what got you are. And we have a great audience here. They love you to death. You have nearly 600 people listening at this point. Thank you for this. Great rundown. And yeah, I agree with you with everything you said here today. That is clownish. He is losing a trade war. And as he loses a trade war, he is standing up and saying, we just want to help China. We just believe in helping China. That's all it is. We have no ulterior motive. Okay, dude.
He's really saying, okay, please call me, Xi Jinping. Please pick up the phone. Please call me.
It's like, please don't call. By the way, in a closed door meeting, he was like, we can't keep this up. This is unsustainable. We can't keep this trade war up. He didn't say that to the public, by the way. He said that in a closed door meeting to other investors and all. Carl Jha, oh God, I don't think I gave you your intro. Let me give it now, your bio. Carl is host of Silk and Steel podcast, focused on China and surrounding regions. and their history, culture, and politics. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Shaw. You can follow his podcast on Twitter at Steel Silk N, the letter N, and subscribe and support their podcast on patreon.com, Silk and Steel Twitter. Carl, is there anywhere else they can find you, by the way?
I do have my YouTube channel, just Carl Zha, so you can look it up. And I do welcome people to check out my Patreon channel, because that's where I do a more in-depth coverage of Chinese history from very beginning. I'm already up to like 450 BC, so I cover a lot, thousands of years of history. BC. Yeah, I already covered thousands of years of history, my friend.
Well, 5,000, from my understanding. I mean, that's what the guy was saying. He was like, what did he say? We said, we've been around for 5,000 years. The U.S. empire will fall and collapse before he said, we'll be here for another 5,000 more. Like, that was their point of view. And I got to be honest, right? It is, I'm sorry to keep you longer. It is very hard for a country that is like 400 years old, or, less than 400, to kind of grasp 5,000 years. And how does China see the upstart in this? Like, it's very weird. Even the books go for this kind of long political arc. Like, the guy who wrote the book, Three Body Problem, he's talking about the arc of history. Even in Wandering Earth, they're talking about like governments lasting over the course of like thousands of years. We don't think that way. Our terms are like 4 years. It's just fascinating. Thank you.
What are you talking about? Quarterly reports, Jamar. Quarterly reports.
Right. All right. It's like that stuff is quick. We got to figure that stuff out fast. We don't have time for this kind of long arcs. Carl, man, thank you for this, man. I really do appreciate it. Good shout out to you, man. I really do appreciate it. You have a good one. Be safe.
Thank you, Jamar.
Always love talking to Carl. He's easy to talk to. He's fun to talk to. He knows his stuff. Boy, a 400 BC. Can we, that is so hard to wrap your head around. 5,000 years of history. Where, how do you teach that in school? Right? How do you teach that in school? That is just fascinating. Mark will be up soon. He's coming on at 8:15, so definitely stick around for Mark. Donald Trump has been very comical watching him. The big reporting that came out over the weekend was this: Zelensky begging for money over the Pope's dead body. No, I'm not. I'm being very serious. Begging for money over the Pope's dead body. As the Pope, the good Pope, lied there dead, Zelensky is beseeching, ambushing Trump to get a meeting. This is fascinating. And it's fascinating for a few points. For one, Macron gets bodied, gets alpha mailed. When Trump's like, you go. I'm not talking to you. You go. In which case he sits there with Zelensky in this kind of weird leaned over position, almost like a dad talking to a child. It's very bizarre. Let's take a look at the clip. It's quick. It's not fast. I mean, it's not long, but look at what happens here. That's Macron. That's Zelensky's homeboy. And you can notice it's his homeboy because look at the handshake. Look at the handshake. The handshake identifies, this is my homeboy. My homeboy is helping me out. All right. And look at Trump looking at him with disgust and contempt. Disgust and contempt. And then you got a priest standing right here behind him as if, I don't know. They bring the chairs. Secret Service was freaking out over this. Macron wants to go over, and Trump is like, you go. But I'm Europe. Go. Sleboda. Go. And Macron follows orders and gets out of Dodge. Now, lip readers looked over this. And then this happened. Please, sir, give me weapons and money. Please. I need weapons and money. That's what I need. No, but I need weapons and money. He's doing this at the Pope's funeral. The international panhandler couldn't wait one day. He could have shown up in D.C. Or maybe Trump doesn't allow him to come back to D.C. He took the opportunity over a dead Pope to beg for money for war that he is fundamentally lost. That is astonishing. He probably is angry. Asher said Zelensky looks angry. He probably is angry. Now, part of the reason that Zelensky is angry, and this is the conversation I definitely want to have with Mark, the full text of the peace proposal has been leaked. The full text has been leaked. I would imagine that Zelensky doesn't like what's in that full text, because if you remember, when it was leaked the first time, Zelensky came out and immediately was like, I'm not giving up Crimea. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not giving up territory. Okay, fair enough. Donald Trump and his European backers apparently might have been having a conversation with Zelensky. And Donald Trump is like, I think he'd give up the territory. Now, again, Zelensky hasn't necessarily said this. And you can't really take Trump's word for it, because Donald Trump, apparently, according to him, is talking to Xi Jinping in this kind of imaginary phone, whatever he has. Xi Jinping is not calling Trump. Trump is having a conversation with Trump. Hasn't stopped him from saying, yes, we're having a conversation. Nor has it stopped him from saying, I think we'll get a deal, despite the fact that many of the things in this deal, it's not going to be accepted by the Russians, nor are the Russians going to be willing to accept this. Let's do this in a week. Peskov even pointed that out. I think Lavrov even pointed out, Americans want this tension of getting this stuff done in a week. That is not the way we work. That is not what's going to take place. And for obvious reasons, we're winning on the battlefield. The Ukrainian military will collapse. They can't keep it up. So we want to have deliberate conversations about the real causes of this war and deal with the real causes of this war. That's what we want to do. We're not litigating this in media. We're not doing any of that. We're going to have realpolitik. That's what we're going to do. And we can say that because, say it with me, the losers don't get to dictate terms. That's the way they're looking at it. How are they wrong? It would be weird for them to accept this deal when this deal only freezes the conflict. That's what Trump wants. He wants a deal to freeze the conflict, something that they've already said is a no. So from their point of view, hey, we appreciate you acknowledging the Crimea. That is a good thing. We appreciate that. They voted to leave. You acknowledge they voted to leave. God bless. We have other things that we need to talk about, which is pretty much everything else. This is the deal that they're going with, or that Trump has said is this final offer. That's the other part, right? This is my final offer. Who are you offering? How are you, a participant to the war, offering anything? It's just wow. So, Russia-Ukraine deal framework, transmitted verbally. Ceasefire, permanent ceasefire. So they want to stop the war immediately. A war, again, that the Russians know full well, infinitely so, that they're winning. And that even Trump concedes that they're winning when he says in 3 years, I think that's a bit long, but whatever, in 3 years, Russia will take all of Ukraine. There's that. And by the way, you don't need to take all of it. You just need a ceasefire, a capitulation. You need a surrender memorandum. We surrender is what they're looking for. Next thing, both sides immediately engage in technical implementation negotiations. Now, Putin has come out and said, I'm willing to negotiate. I will do so unconditionally. He's being very magnanimous. And I wonder why. And again, this is some of the conversations I want to have with Mark. Is he being this way because from his point of view, Europe and Zelensky will never accept the deal? And so, yes, I can be this magnanimous guy who's willing to have talks. However, there's always a catch. In your law, you're not allowed to talk to me. So you need to remove that part before we can ever have a conversation. Now, part of this reason might be he knows that at some point Zelensky is going to go. And when Zelensky goes, whoever's come behind him needs the ability to negotiate in real terms. So, but whatever, he said, you need to remove that before we can talk. That's under your law, so that needs to happen. And any conversation doesn't mean that I think you're legitimate, by the way. There's that. Ukraine gets security guarantees. Now, it says Ukraine receives robust security guarantees. Nobody knows what that is. Nobody knows what that is. Guarantor states be ad hoc group of European states plus willing non-European states. Okay, well, this is right here, red line. That's a no. Dead on arrival. If you are talking about the UN, maybe, but European states are just NATO. So again, when Russia said there are things we need to talk about, Ukraine will not seek to join NATO. Again, right here, you have somewhat of a sticking point. Because the problem is, Ukraine was supposed to be neutral anyway, and by its own constitution was neutral. They just removed it. But let's say that's not a sticking point. Let's say it's not a sticking point. Let's keep going. Ukraine may pursue EU membership. At one point, I don't think Russia had an issue with this. I don't know where they are now. De jure recognition of Russian control of Crimea, of Lugansk, Zaporozhye, Donetsk, Kherson, Kharkiv Oblast. So effectively, we will recognize your ownership of Crimea. But de jure is, we understand that you have it. We understand that we can't do anything about it. However, we don't recognize it. What does that mean, though? What does that mean? And what does it mean in real terms? We know that you got it. We know that we can't do anything about the fact that you have it. Fair enough. Fair enough. But we don't accept it. So it's still in contest. It's still in contest. It's still in conflict. Let's go to Syria for a bit. When that happened in Syria, where Syria took back all of this territory, and you had Idlib, and it's like, okay, de jure, right? We understand that the terrorists have it. We can't do anything about the fact that the terrorists have it. And so it's still in contest. It's still in conflict. And then one day, at the most opportune time, it explodes, and terrorists go rummaging into Syria. So from the Russian point of view, okay, that may be unacceptable. We know that we have it. We don't need you to tell us that we have it. We already know it. We won it on the battlefield at the barrel of a gun. That is the reality of events. Why would we stop? Is the interesting question. Like, why would we allow this to be a frozen conflict along these lines when the reality of it is, under our Constitution, all of this area is ours? And we are compelled to, by the Russian Constitution, to keep going until we take all of the regions, not just part of the regions. Like, that percentages of some of those regions now. So there's that. But maybe there's wiggle room. Maybe you can politically finesse that on some level. Here's the next one. Ukraine regains control of the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant through U.S. and the administration of the plant with electricity distributed both sides. Also, the Kharkov Dam. So they believe that Russia is going to give up Zaporozhye, something that, again, is part of their constitution, and let the U.S. on that territory to administer the plant. That is what they're trying to say. Now, when Lavrov was asked about this, Lavrov pointed out, well, we haven't heard this from the Americans. They haven't mentioned this to us. If they do mention it to us, we will communicate to the Americans. I'm paraphrasing, F no. F no. Ukraine enjoys unhindered passage on the Dnieper River and control of the Kinburn Spit. I don't know what that is. Economically, the United States and Ukraine will implement an economic cooperation mineral agreement. Now, Donald Trump has said the $100 billion they don't have to pay, or the Ukrainian side of that negotiation, but effectively, they've gotten rid of the $100 billion. So you don't owe us anything from the money that we gave during Joe Biden's term. Ukraine will be fully reconstructed and compensated financially. Sanctions on Russia resulting from the conflict in 2014 will be removed. I don't know if Russia cares, especially in the context of the other stuff. Let's keep going. U.S.-Russia economic cooperation on energy and the industrial sectors. Now, I would point out again, the loser does not get to dictate terms. And it comes across as if Donald Trump, who is party to the conflict, is trying to dictate terms. I thought I sent Mark the link. Hold on. 1 second. One sec. All right, let me send Mark the link. Apparently, I screwed up. Come on, come on. Give me 1 second, guys. I messed up this morning. Apparently, I did not send Mark the link. I see what I did. Okay. Okay, I see what I did. That's my fault. I sent him, hey, Mark, the link is below. Please join at 8:15. And then there was no link. All right. Mark has the link. Mark is going to be coming shortly. He is going to get into this a bit further. Kiev Post pointed out, or Kiev Independent pointed out, that the Europeans received Donald Trump's final offer and sent back their own final offer. Now, their final offer calls for a ceasefire immediately. Effectively saying, before we have any conversation about land trades, ceasefire. That's the counter proposal, right? And in fact, I'll even show you the article that I am pulling this from. I don't want you to think I'm just making this up. So, full text of peace proposal, it's at odds with the European position. Then you have this one, the bromance between Zelensky and Macron. And there is difference in the security guarantees. Mark, you have my apologies. Right here, let me kill this and bring my man on. Mark, you have my deepest apologies. I thought I sent you that link. Apparently, I just sent you the first line. Said, hey, the link is below. And then I lied because there was nothing below. Welcome to
happen.
Yeah, it happens. How you doing, man? You doing okay today?
Yeah, I'm alive. How are you, Jamar?
I am also alive. I'm doing well. I can't complain. Obviously, Kursk has been liberated. I would imagine there were other parts on the battlefield that were also liberated over the course of the last week. I don't think we've talked about it over the week. So can we dip into that for a minute? What is the significance of Kursk being liberated, short of radical humiliation, 70,000 people dying, loads of equipment being blown up? Is there a larger significance to Kursk being liberated?
Okay, so first of all, Jamar, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Always.
So yes, Putin joined Gerasimov, the head of the Russian military, also the head of the special military operation, the equivalent of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in a televised presentation where part of the briefing that Gerasimov gave Trump was televised. And in that briefing, he informed Putin that the all of the populated centers of the Kursk region and the Belgorod region, which actually no populated centers had ever been fully taken, but had been liberated by joint Russian and North Korean forces, right? And so, first of all, mea culpa. I and pretty much that everyone else in the alt media space, not that that's an excuse, have been dismissing claims of North Korean troops fighting alongside Russian troops in the Kursk region for months now. And to my defense, I saw no credible evidence that they were really there. Nothing that was presented by the Kiev regime. They're the fake Koreans that they captured. Evidently, they never really captured any Koreans. They were Russian Buryat or other ethnics who happened to look Asian, not really North Korean, but close enough. And although the U.S. harped on about this, I was under the assumption that it was part of the Kiev regime propaganda, like the Ghost of Kiev or the Snake Island hoax, or the Russians attacked the Crimean Bridge and Nord Stream and any number of other things.
Yeah.
And one of my assumptions was that although Russian media, Russian big media, Russian state media, Russian corporate media wouldn't report it if the Russian government was trying to keep it quiet, was that, however, there are an awful lot of Russian war journalists, war bloggers on Telegram and else out there who are all along behind the front lines. That I follow a number of them. I know a number of them personally, right? To at least at a degree that I had thought that it would be impossible to keep something like that quiet,
And
right?
they did.
And they did. And they did. And a number of people that I know said, "Yeah, sorry, I couldn't tell you. We were asked and I couldn't tell you." And then pictures of these war journalists with North Korean troops showed up on the internet. And I'm like, thanks, assholes. I got egg on my face, right? I've been saying I see North Korean people for months now. Now, let me make it perfectly clear. I don't care. Right? I mean, I've said this multiple times. If North Koreans were fighting alongside Russian troops, we've got thousands and thousands of Western quote unquote mercenaries, specialists, experts, and anything. And this was even in Russian territory, which, this Kursk Fool's Crusade.
Mhm.
So, but nonetheless, I was surprised, and it does raise an element of personal doubt, right? If I and others that I trust were wrong on this, surely there's some other things that we're wrong about,
Of
right?
course.
And
You're a
that
person.
has to be factored in. Now, I still think overall 90% of what the Kiev regime puts out is complete bunk, and that on to the contrary, 80% of what the Russian government puts out is honest, right? I say 80. I don't. It's not 100. And I've always said the way that the Russian government lies is by omission, and that's what they did. The Russian government never denied that there were North Korean troops there,
Right.
and in retrospect, maybe we should have been paying closer attention to that.
Like, that's weird by itself, right? They didn't confirm or deny. They didn't just say anything.
So
Yeah.
that is something we should check. So we haven't had an exact number, right? So we might as well use the numbers that the West have been using on this, somewhere between 8,000 and 12,000 seems likely. By all Russian accounts, they fought with professionalism and courage.
Mm-hmm.
If a degree of ideological zeal that at times disturbed the Russian soldiers a little bit in their willingness, their eagerness to volunteer for actions that the Russians found suicidal and said, no, you're not going to do that, right?
Yeah.
But evidently the language problems and interoperability was a problem that was overcome very quickly. The North Korean troops were evidently killing themselves in the rare situations where they faced capture, right? The standard of pulling a grenade or something of the sort that is a hallmark of Western movies, and it's heroic when Western heroes do it, and of course it's a sign of insanity and ideological dogma when or brainwashing when say North Korean soldiers would do it. But they were given credit for providing a assistance in several key locations. And I think we have to come back to a previous New York Times article now that had discussed this and said, put out a what they presented as insider information, that it wasn't that Russia requested that North Korean troops fight according to the terms of their new treaty. It was that North Korea volunteered their troops because they wanted to gain what is extremely valuable combat experience in a peer-on-peer conflict with, drones and electronic warfare and then these other elements playing such a key instance that, essentially no full militaries other than Russia and the Kiev regime in Ukraine have battlefield experience with right now. So that itself is a very valuable learning experience. But it's also an indication that we can expect Russian and North Korean troops to fight together in the future. And if there ever is an invasion of North Korea, Russia will now be treaty and honor bound. Will be treaty bound to provide some form of assistance. And I would argue they would be honor bound to provide troops, right? Since North Korea did as well. Not that I see any U.S. ground invasion of North Korea to be something likely into the future. Now, the Kiev regime, interlocutors on the internet are all, they're still fighting in Kursk and Belgorod. And you have to go back to the exact statements that were made. All populated centers have been liberated. There are still a few tree lines and trenches, evidently, right on the border in not only the Kursk region, but the Belgorod region as well, where there, as of at least, I would say, 24 hours ago, there was still some fighting going on, whether that's true or not, but they had been ejected from any population center, and at this point it's semantic, right? So what are the implications of this? Well, first of all, the Kiev regime invested so much political capital, whatever the original goal was, right? And they've tossed out so many versions, right? And there usually is more than one reason why you do these things. They've never fully admitted that they attempted to seize the Kursk nuclear power plant and potential tactical nuclear weapons that were held nearby in the town just outside the Kursk nuclear power plant. But there have been several Kiev regime officials who have hinted enough at that we can understand that was one goal. After that, there has also been the suggestion that they were preventing a Russian attack from that direction. Well, maybe they were up until now, but now that's coming. Right? Russia's forces are going across the border here into Sumy, from both the Kursk region and from the Belgorod region. Putin has declared the setting up of a buffer zone. And it must be noted that if the regional capital of Sumy is taken, as it was briefly in 2022, then the road to Kiev is right open. And certainly the Kiev regime is worried about that. Maybe those 70,000 dead and wounded and all of the Western military equipment. And by some Kiev regime accounts, they lost more Western equipment in the Kursk Fool's Crusade than they did during the failed 2023 NATO planned offensive in the south, in Zaporozhye towards the Sea of Azov. So that is a significant amount of military gear, which is why Russia was happy to let the Kursk incursion continue for a time as a firebag, where all of this invaluable, or largely irreplaceable Western military equipment was led out into the effective open, right? Not in fortified defensive lines and trenches where it might have been better use. So there's Zelensky put so much personal political capital on this. Even as of the last few days, he has appeared, right, speaking to the captive Ukrainian people again, that this was a great victory of Ukraine. He showed us where he has a painting outside of his office of Ukrainian forces heroically seizing Russian land. Of course, he doesn't have them, dying, and being driven out, defeated in humiliation. And that's right across the side from his fantasy painting of the burning Kremlin in Moscow as well, showing clearly the mentality of this delusional emperor with no clothes. But he's lost, significant political capital. He repeatedly claimed that he was going to trade this seized Russian territory for Ukrainian territory, which was always a joke. Russia was never going to do that because they had the ability to take this back, right? And they had no reason to trade anything for it when they could take it back, which is what they did. And yeah, certainly there was a cost to it, but I think the numbers of the Kiev regime dead and wounded, the Kiev regime casualties in manpower and equipment will, in the future, show how lopsided and how much of a waste, particularly a strategic waste, but also a supply and logistics waste that this was. Think about it. The Kiev regime had to maintain supply lines under assault from Russian air power, from Russian artillery, from Russian drones in a considerable stretch on very poor, bad backwoods roads, because this was a backwoods, relatively unpopulated region. And maintaining supplies and logistics along that is extremely difficult, and there are costs and a war of attrition. Logistics. Amateurs study, tactics, study strategy, and experts study logistics is the old, rubric of military studies that has a lot of weight. Has that statement, that point of view has a lot of merit to it. And that's certainly part of what we saw out. And Sujo was strangled, right? Supply and logistics wise, no matter how many reinforcements were thrown in there, well before the much publicized Operation Pipeline achieved some tactical surprise on the defensive positions there. So, loss of supplies, manpower in an attrition war that the Kiev war regime couldn't afford. Huge political capital loss for Zelensky personally, whom made a very big personal deal out of this. Also, now Russian forces, very large forces assembled in the Kursk and the Belgorod region, are assembled to move into Kiev regime territory for the north, and they've already beaten the Kiev regime forces remaining on the other side before. So they've opened up the lion into their home here, or the bear, if you want to think of it in more appropriate allegorical terms. And the Russian forces are coming. That's not a question. In fact, there has even been in the past week that we have seen a new structural division of what had been the operational group North, Sever, and it has been split. And so we still have a Sever, but there has been declared a new Kursk operational group.
Battle group.
So that will that I think clearly indicates that the Russian Ministry of Defense has designs definitely to continue on into Sumy at the very least, and perhaps further. And there is all of this noise that a little bit further to the west that Russian forces have been gathering for the last few weeks to the west of Kursk, west area of the Kursk region, and into the Bryansk region to go into the Chernigov region, which is Sumy is in the north center of the borderline, right? And then Kharkov is to the east. Then to the west of that is Chernigov, and then Chernigov then is right on the Dnieper River, up further up there. And if Russia does have designs on seizing the entire Russian side of the Dnieper River, then Chernigov and Sumy by default fall into that as well. So look for Russian moves not only into Sumy region, not only into Kharkov region, where Russian forces have reactivated there in the last few weeks, but also into the Chernigov region as well, all across the northern border between the two countries. And again, Russia has, besides strategic objectives, Russia has the goal of widening the contact line to spread the Kiev regime forces, which are already suffering from extreme manpower shortage, out as thin as possible along that contact line. So, if the Kiev regime doesn't send forces to reinforce, then Russia may decide to take another look at a deep dive, right? Otherwise, it will be engagement and the grinding war of attrition and, improvement of positions as is the constant rollback of the Kiev regime forces. But it's also important to me when I look at the words that Putin and Gerasimov used to describe the taking of Ukrainian settlements in the Sumy region, they used the term liberated, which indicates that they definitely have designs, and we can maybe one day expect a referendum being held in Sumy and a Sumy National Republic being formed as well.
Oh, this is the Arovich thing, right? Yeah. It's like right now it's going to be 4, and next week it's going to be 6, in a few months it's going to be 8. Wow. Let me ask you this. So effectively, the military that was built up in order to repel the invasion in the Kursk is now a formation that can move forward and effectively keep going.
Offensive, yes.
And the 70,000 that had invaded prior no longer exists.
Well,
to defend the territory.
Some number of those that are wounded will have been returned to combat, right? Depending on how the Russian military does their numbers. I don't know whether they're counting in that as the wounded as irretrievably wounded or all wounded, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, a large percentage of that 70+ thousand, is now, no longer with us.
Wow. That is, oh God, that is a disaster.
Fool's Crusade. I hope they enjoyed all those Western headlines starting in last August. Putin humiliated as blah, 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 as Ukrainian troops fact a barely defended backwoods border, with their best troops and equipment. Oh, we achieved this great victory of defeating some border guards and young men doing their 1 year of national service. Well, and they humiliated Putin. Well, I hope that humiliation tasted good. How does it taste now, guys? How does humiliation taste now? I would ask the editors in the Western media who wrote those headlines back in August. How does that crow taste? And I say that, forgive me, crows, right? In my background. I don't really mean it. No one's eating you. Don't worry.
Does this have political consequences for Zelensky at home?
There's no politics as normal in the Kiev regime, of course, right? There's no elections. There's no real opposition parties. There are quote unquote opposition parties within the Maidan regime, like the Poroshenko's European Solidarity Party, but even those have been rendered effectively toothless. The only politics that matters in the Kiev regime is the support of primarily the United States, to a lesser extent Europe. And if there was a time for Zelensky to be removed sometime in the last 2 years, that has passed, right? He has neutered Zelensky, his political opponents. Right now, there just is not it would be a very inopportune time to, affect some type of coup or political change to put someone in there now. Kiev regime forces are too back-footed at the moment. Trump is making too big a deal out of his, I believe, ill-fated attempts to get a ceasefire or a negotiated settlement. Maybe the chance of replacing Zelensky will emerge at some time in the future. I would think that it would be more likely for Russia to do it at some point in the future rather than the United States. But still, right now, it is the United States that is keeping Zelensky in power.
I'm glad you bring that up. So Reuters produced Donald Trump's peace plan. And I got to be honest with you, I'm somewhat confused. Not entirely, but I want to get your take.
Did you play the music clip that goes along with it?
I did not play the music clip.
I've seen that there is a music clip that goes with it. It goes dun 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 dun. The circus theme, right? Because that's what this peace plan is. And
by the way, he said it's his
I
final
consider
offer.
it actually not just a joke, but an offense. It is insulting that Trump is presenting this.
It's the point of this plan to be denied, because I couldn't. There are so many red lines in this plan, and Donald Trump is like, I present it as my final plan. But Putin is being very magnanimous. Peskov is being very, again, magnanimous. Well, we appreciate the acknowledgement of the Crimea, that Donald Trump acknowledges this is Russian territory. We appreciate that. We accept that Donald Trump says that they voted to leave, and damn it, they left. Fair enough. However, there are other things that we need to discuss and other things we need to talk about. We're not going to litigate this in the public. This is going to be realpolitik. Like, they're being very, diplomatic about something that they know is a dead letter on its face. The stuff that is in this is pretty astonishing, which is why I wanted to get your take on why they were being so magnanimous about it. And maybe the whole point is, right, we're going to be political because, you got to be that way if you want to, come on, add it to the stage. There we are. So just a few points. Permanent ceasefire, again, dead letter. Both sides immediately engage in technical implementation of negotiations.
So first of all, Russia has no interest in a ceasefire.
Exactly.
Right? That allows the West to send more weapons to Ukraine, to the Kiev regime, to give them a breather and a chance to conscript and at least give a minimal amount of training to new forced conscripts. Russia has no interest in that. They're winning on the battlefield. They do not benefit from a ceasefire. The Kiev regime does. Therefore, they will not accept a ceasefire without the conditions they have already Putin laid out well back in the 14th of June of last year, which include the Kiev regime vacating all of the remaining territory that they hold in the 4 regions, well, 3 regions really, in question, which of course they're not going to do. Right. But also, the Russian government has since also demanded that the West, not just the United States, but the West, stop all military and intelligence aid to the Kiev regime. And until then, there will be no ceasefire. We don't care.
Which makes sense, right? Because at that point, you're just loading them up with weapons. Wow.
This is the Minsk 1, Minsk 2, Istanbul communique, no more unilateral ceasefires.
That goes to the other part. Yeah. U.S. provides de jure recognition of the territories that Russia has effectively liberated.
Hey, what does that mean? What does that mean? That doesn't mean
that means a ceasefire. I mean, that means a frozen conflict. That's what that means. Yeah. Because it means
for how long, right? For 1 year, for 1 month, for 1 year, for 2 years till Trump leaves office. That de jure recognition means, de jure recognition, even de jure recognition of Crimea, that could be changed with the next U.S. president, right? It could be changed with this president, right? Because when we're talking de facto recognition, then that means absolutely nothing. That means less than nothing, as far as I'm concerned. And we have had an intelligence report from the Russian intelligence agencies on the conflict in Ukraine that has been recently delivered to Putin's office. We haven't seen the entire report, quite obviously, but we've had some leaked tidbits from it. And basically what they're saying is that, the Americans can't offer nothing, that negotiations with the Americans will ultimately be worth less than the paper that they are written on, right? So take that into account. The Russians are playing a game, like everyone is, of manipulating Trump so that when the negotiations inevitably fail, as they will, everyone is maneuvering so that the other parties, right, meaning Europe and the Kiev regime on one side and Russia on the other, is maneuvering so that the other side receives the lion's share of the blame from Trump's ego personally for the failure of his great, peace plan. And Russia's playing that game, right?
But Trump has to know that this was a dead letter.
No,
I mean, the
he
idea that
he
the Trump
doesn't
administration
have to know that. He does
but
not
the notion
have to know that.
that the U.S. is going to take Zaporozhye nuclear power plant and run it.
It's a great deal. Everyone gets energy, right? It's a great deal. Why wouldn't you take that? I'm a good guy. I'll take good care of that nuclear power plant. Right? I mean, no, we do not know it. We've got Mike Waltz and Marco Rubio and these other neocons, Kellogg, whom is obviously out there in La La Land, advising Trump, right? On one hand, and Witkoff and others that seem to be at least more amenable to the reality, which is the Russian position. But that we cannot make the assumption that Trump knows the real situation. I would posit that he doesn't. This offer means that he does not know the real situation.
Wow. Or that he does.
5D chess, that this is some maneuver and he knows it's going to fail and he's trying to create political space to blame the Kiev regime. I think he's already got that. I think if he wanted to do that, he could have done that at the White House moment. I'm not a big fan of the Trump 5D chess theorems, and there are a zillion of them out there. I don't see any 5D chess plans coming from the Trump administration on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, on Iran, on trade war, tariff war with China. I see a whole lot of clusterfucks. That's what I see.
It is what it is. What it is. It's not. There's a playbook at work.
Take a look at the signal chats that use the bombing emoticons for bombing Yemen, right? That Hegseth and others, put out there. This is not a team of crack 5D chess thinking geostrategic geniuses running this administration. This is a New York real estate developer and self-branding magnate and his collection of political, personal loyalists.
So from the Russian point of view, this deal is going to fail. We are going to be very magnanimous and diplomatic as we talk about this deal and everything else, but we know as a flat fact.
And we're going to try to make sure the blame falls on the Kiev regime in Ukraine and the Europeans.
So we can get some kind of deal with America, like basically bring down the temperature with the Americans because we're going to blame them for.
Yeah, well, again, Russia does still want to improve bilateral relations. But more importantly, when the deal breaks down, they don't want Trump to revert back to the Biden policy of continuing to provide weapons and intelligence to Ukraine for the foreseeable future. if there's no peace settlement, and possibly escalating things further. And Trump, once again, not that Russia places a lot of seriousness on threats of banking sanctions or secondary sanctions, but Trump has returned once again in his foreign policy by Truth Social posts with all screaming capital letters of demanding that Vladimir stop and threatening sanctions if Putin is leading him on about wanting peace. Russia does want peace on their terms, not your terms. You lost this conflict. You admitted, Rubio admitted, this was the US's proxy war on Russia in Ukraine. It said it flat out, right? And you can argue, this is Biden's war, not mine. It's your war. When you became president, Russians have since died from American weapons. This is your war. You own it, right? If you want to try and, as part of your face-saving spin, want to blame it, the war on Biden and everything, Russia will probably grant you that as long as you walk away, right? And let Russia finish what they're going to do in Ukraine, right? And it has to be said that during that briefing, Putin was speaking about removing the Nazi regime in Kiev, in Ukraine, right? That is significant. That is the first. We've heard it from Lavrov. We've heard it from, Peskov. We've heard it from others. But this is the first time we have heard Putin specifically, essentially, first of all, characterize the regime in Kiev as Nazi. All right, I prefer the term more exact, Banderite, right? The specific type of fascism that was generated in Western Ukraine in the 1930s. But regardless, he also, made clear allusions to, our goals of removing that regime.
Yeah.
Right. Now, a regime removal can happen politically instead of militarily. I think it's unlikely, but right. But the goal is, as far as the Russian government is concerned, regime change now. And I think we've been saying that for a long time.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh,
But
denazification. How do you do it?
Putin himself has said.
So that is now one of the key objectives, which means either they're going to Kiev or, I guess, create a political crisis one way or the other.
Yeah, I honestly
that.
don't know how the regime can be removed without. I mean, the regime doesn't mean Zelensky. The regime means the regime.
Exactly.
The Maidan regime that came to power, with the openly West-backed putsch in 2014, right? And, I mean, Poroshenko was replaced with Zelensky and the regime survived, right? So removing Zelensky does not mean the regime is gone. The regime must be removed, right? And I just, maybe some avenue to remove it politically, at some point in the future will be, come into vision, but I don't see how that can be done without some type of military victory and forcing an unconditional surrender.
But as you pointed out, the Sumy going through that area is the road to Kiev.
Road to Kiev. Yeah.
Wow.
And unfortunately, in that case, the road to Kiev may just lead to the road to Lvov, but.
Okay, fair enough. Okay. So this deal is dead. Donald Trump is going to flip out at some point. Oh my God, I can't believe you guys are horrible people. You're not accepting my deal. The blame is going to land somewhere, whether it's on Europe and Zelensky, or for that matter, whether it's on.
You've seen those casino spinning wheels, right? I don't know what the exact name, the roulette wheel or whatever, and you're trying to decide whether the ball's going to bounce on the black or red. That's what it is. Who ends up with the blame when these peace settlements in the next week or 2 weeks or whatever fail? Because they will fail. And we've been talking about it since September. Russia is going to effectively say no, right? Zelensky may also open his mouth and say no if he's stupid, right?
He's been saying no the whole time, by the way.
Yeah, well, the Europeans have been trying to rein him in and keep him quiet and say, do the smart thing and say, let Russia say no. You just keep your mouth shut and agree with whatever he says, because it's never going to happen anyway. At the end of the day, Russia is going to say no. But Zelensky has his own little mental political games. He's got his own Banderites to deal with in his own regime and so forth. And he's stupid enough to put himself out there. I mean, a smart, strategic thinking, diplomatic thinking person would say the Russians are never going to agree to this anyway. So I can tactically agree to it with the certain knowledge that it will never be put into force and it will line me on Trump's good side. But he keeps not doing that.
But this also means, though, that Russia, has to take all of Ukraine? And I mean, where do they stop, or can they stop at this point?
I can't tell you that. I can't tell you that. I don't know how long the Europeans can keep the regime fighting. I don't know if Trump is going to resume military aid. There have been assessments by the Russian intelligence report that I mentioned earlier, supposedly also says that their assessment was that the regime could continue to fight without U.S. support for another 12 to 20 months. Or 12
Are you
to
serious?
30, yes. But in this report, they also then said that that may now be an overestimate, right? But we don't know, right? I am continually amazed that the Kiev regime is able to keep its military fighting. I'm always impressed after everything that has happened, after a continuous stream of Russian victories since defeating the summer offensive in 2023. And, but it is a slow grinding improvement, and it was interrupted by this great narrative winning, humiliating Kursk incursion, right? I seriously listened to Western experts, right? We listened. It was no less than Michael Kaufman at CNAS, right? And he was on War on the Rocks, and he certainly said it was a big victory for the narrative. And I'm like, maybe that's your problem, is you've been fighting a narrative war instead of the real war for the last 3 years. I hope that narrative victory was your narrative Stalingrad, because it hasn't netted you anything now.
I guess what I'm getting at is this is no longer a special military operation. This is a war. And in real terms, they have to take all of Ukraine. Like, meaning whether Trump continues the weapons, whether Europe continues the money and the weapons, regardless of anything else, there is no stopping point. Where
that is the likely, right? There are other, right? Let's say that the Europeans and the Americans both agree to a deal that would remove the regime. That's extremely unlikely, right? That it could be achieved politically. It could be achieved with some type of political collapse, right? Where the ultra nationalists or I can't really see. I don't think Poroshenko has the political power to stage some type of internal coup that would lead to the collapse. But the ultra nationalists may at some time, the Banderites, the actual Banderite military leaders, they may at some point, turn. And that again, I think it's unlikely because they know where their survival depends. But there's a possibility at some point down the road that there could be some type of internal political collapse. And there is the possibility of some type of unconditional surrender being forced and actually accepted, right? But I just can't see them at the moment. I think that the chances of them being, of it ending that way are still, not nothing, but still slim, right? They obviously, any of those would be preferable than fighting all the way past Kiev to Lvov and the border with Poland. But Russia has to be prepared that it may be that. And even after that, then you'll almost certainly be looking at a guerrilla war staged out of Europe, where the Europeans will only recognize their band of Banderites and whoever as the legitimate government of Ukraine and everything. There is no end to this. I said it back in February, or well, actually early March, in an interview, my first interview on the conflict on Consortium News, and I said this would be a forever war. There were other people on that same thing that were saying this is all going to be over in 2 months. It's all going to be over in 2 months, right? And I said it would be a forever war in one form or another, frozen conflict, guerrilla war, whatever, but that Ukraine was broken, right? Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall, and all the hegemon's forces and all the hegemon's men couldn't put Ukraine back together again.
Is that what you're looking for? Like, meaning is that because either Europe is delusional or in their minds, force them to take it all and force the guerrilla war, meaning they're seeing the same thing you're saying.
Did you keep hearing the European leaders saying they're going to be at war with Russia in 5 years or so? That's what they're talking about. They think that they can drag this out for a number of years. There may be a fortuitous change in a U.S. presidency within that period of time. They're going to ride this out and hope that there's some black swan event or some change of circumstances that will change the end game calculus. But the Europeans have no more intentions of any type of peaceful conclusion of this, except on their own terms, meaning a complete Ukrainian victory and Russia's unconditional surrender, any more than Russia does, the opposite. So that's unfortunately, I do not see, certainly, I mean, we could see at some point ceasefires declared, right? We could see some type of frozen conflict temporarily come into existence for a number of months, a year, even, those are all possibilities down the road. Yeah. But this ends with the end of Ukraine as we know it, right? That I consider an inevitability in the long term.
Mark, wow. Fantastic analysis. That is depressing as all hell.
Yeah, and those aren't good things for Russia, right? Think of the reconstruction costs of the entirety of Ukraine, because no Russian politician has an answer to that, right? No, much less a continued cold/hot war with Europe going on for years into the future, maybe with the US, maybe not. These are not good Russian outcomes. These are not the outcome that Putin wanted when he launched the special military operation in 2022. But I would argue that it was probably the most likely outcome, whether it was what Russia wanted or not. There is no good outcome. John Mearsheimer said it best. I will continue to use it. He said Russia will win, but it will be an ugly victory. Yeah, I mean they're never. We don't live in the world of platonic ideals, right? Everything is ugly in this world, right? Including whatever Russian victory comes out of this. It will be a Russian victory, but it won't be a clean, perfect victory with normalization of relations and some type of pro-Russian Ukrainian government power coming into power in Kiev that the West accepts and Russia accepts. No, it's just not in the cards.
The alternative of Ukraine being part of NATO is worse, right? I mean, like,
no. I don't agree with that. I do not agree with that.
That's a question. That's not.
Yeah. No, I don't agree with that, because a weaponized Ukraine whose entire military, economy, and population was directed to be a weapon against Russia, which is the NATO alternative. Whether NATO or de facto NATO, as far as Russia is concerned, there's really no difference there. That was what was going to happen after 2014 and after the failure of the naive and ill-fated Minsk agreements, at least as far as I'm concerned, right? That was why Russia had to act. Ukraine was going to literally, its population, its economy, its military, everything, its intelligence was going to be weaponized as a battle platform pointed at Moscow. And Russia could not allow that to continue, much less come into full being.
Right.
It had to remove. That's why when Russia says it was an existential threat, that's not rhetoric. That is very real, right? I mean, we've all read the reports. The New York Times reported openly. The CIA rebuilt Ukrainian intelligence and military intelligence from the ground up and opened 12 bases on the Russian border that they were launching covert operations into Russia.
That's what I'm saying. That's worse. That's a worst case scenario than the special military operation that effectively was taking place.
Yeah.
Like, you couldn't allow Ukraine to become that
but
platform.
it would have been much better if Putin had acted in 2014, right? Or in 2015, or the Minsk Accords. Maybe Russia was not prepared at that time, but neither was the Kiev regime or the West, right? And since then, it has always been inevitable. Either it was an existential question. Eventually, Ukraine would be weaponized against Russia into some either political or military full extent. And that's why the West provoked it, right? They are the ones who oversaw the overthrow of the fairly neutral, a Ukrainian government committed to geopolitical neutrality. And when they said no to the EU association agreement, and then the full weaponization of Ukraine then commenced, and Russia just could not allow it. It's a bad outcome, right? The special military operation is a worst possibility outcome. I mean, other than outright World War III, right? I mean, that no one should have any illusion here. It should never have had to come to this. But it had to be done, because the alternative of a NATO battle platform made out of Ukraine is even worse.
Yeah.
For Russia.
Mark, great breakdown. It is unfortunate that this is going to continue on, linger on. But
it's our lives. Just get used to it.
Mark Sleboda, International Relations Security Analyst. Mark, where can people find you?
At Elon Musk's Twitter X at Mark Sleboda 1, or at Substack, or Telegram at The Real Politique with Mark Sleboda.
His analysis is fantastic. Mark, you have been one of the best ones, man. Thank you for this. You have a good one. Be safe, okay?
Cheers. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye. Mark is fantastic, put it mildly. We have Dimitri Lascaris. He's coming up shortly. And we are going to, what I've started doing is asking my guests what they want to talk about, in addition to stuff that I want to talk about. Sometimes there are very specific things that they're on their mind and so forth, and I want to let them get it out. He wants to talk about, right now, the ICJ is having court. And what they're going with is this notion of basically Israel starving the Palestinian population. Israel has decided to use starvation as a tool of war. They've started the U.S. is backing them in this. If you talk to any random representative from the U.S., they would not just advocate for the policy, but defend Israel in that policy of starvation. The food and whatnot that was apparently there has run out. And so at this point, you have people who are just hungry and thirsty with no means of getting provisions. And they are looking at that, and not just, on wicked or not, they're openly saying, this is our policy of starvation. The ICJ, yes, I get it. There's a condemnative component to it that may take months for them to make a ruling on something that is happening now. I guess it may feel good for them to make that argument in court. But the reality of it is, the ICJ does not have a military. There's not political force that can be applied. There's not any other militaries that are willing to get involved. And so whatever condemnative ruling that they come down with is just a condemnative ruling. It is wagging your finger. You're bad people for doing this, but that is effectively all they have at their disposal. I want to bring in my man, though, Dimitri Lascaris. I'm deeply appreciative that you are here. He is a lawyer, journalist, and activist from Montreal, Quebec. In 2020, Dimitri ran for the leadership of the Green Party of Canada. Dimitri, welcome to the show, man. Thank you for accepting this. How you doing? You doing okay?
I'm doing okay. It's a beautiful day here in the south of Greece. We're living in a troubled world, but the beauty helps. So,
oh, you're in Greece. Nice. Yeah. Very nice. You wanted to bring up the Palestinian issue. Now, the ICJ, I was listening to them give arguments this morning as I was coming on. Give me your take on this. Israel is not hiding the ball anymore. They're vocally admitting we are using starvation as a weapon. This is what we are effectively doing. Mm-hmm. This breaches international law. I always make the argument international law doesn't exist. So I'm not going to necessarily linger on that point. I think it's more condemnative by the fact that they're admitting that they're starving 2.1 million people, or how many other people that are left in Gaza. You are a lawyer. There is nothing that the United Nations General Assembly can do about the fact that one of its member states doesn't care about the bylaws of the entirety of the organization, including expelling Israel from the UN. Like, they don't have any powers at all. The UN, like, is it that the Security Council is the only body within the context of the UN that has some kind of legal authority associated with it? What's going on with this?
Well, the resolutions of the General Assembly do factor into the mix of what international law is. But then there's the question of enforcing international law. So, it's sometimes said that the General Assembly's, resolutions they're non-binding, right? Well, if what is meant by that is that the General Assembly lacks enforcement powers under the UN Charter, then that would be correct. It is the UN Security Council that has enforcement powers, and that is why it was intentionally set up this way, Jamarl, because there are 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, 3 of which are Britain, France, and the United States. The other 2 being the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation. And the victorious powers after the Second World War, established a mechanism which basically ensured that no matter what the General Assembly did, no matter what international law may be, it would finally be up to each and every one of them acting unanimously to decide whether or not the law was actually going to be enforced. And so this is the problem. The UN General Assembly has spoken loudly and clearly that Israel is violating the basic human rights of the Palestinian people. There have been countless resolutions, and there have been a number of resolutions at the UN Security Council to that effect. But to date, the UN Security Council has not adopted meaningful enforcement measures. And there's no prospect of that happening as long as genocidal psychopaths are in charge of the British, French, and American governments.
You mentioned that Donald Trump recently, I think he was on an airplane, and they said, hey, they asked him something about Gaza. And he was like, yeah, we're pushing Israel to apparently not starve the population. Now, if you talk to Mike Huckabee, if you talk to other people in the Trump administration, they have zero issue with the starvation. And they would defend Israel as they go about starving the population. Now, Israel is saying, well, we're doing this until we get back our hostages. Hamas has been trying to get back those hostages going back for nearly a year at this point. They have blown off every deal, even the deal that the Trump administration apparently came up with in the very beginning, which seems, in retrospect, is not a deal at all. Just time for Israel to reload, bring more manpower, and then go back on a killing spree. They violated that very deal that would have gotten them back their hostages. So it doesn't seem like the issue is the hostages. The issue seems to be more, we just want to kill Palestinians. We want to take the territory, which has always been. Why is Trump even giving voice to that right now? What is the point of him doing that?
I think there's a lot of stuff going on here. What he said precisely was that we have to get food and medicine. There's a lot of suffering going on in Gaza. We have to get food and medicine to the people of Gaza. And I've said to Netanyahu that we have to be good to Gaza. Those were the words that he used. And he was asked, how did Netanyahu react? And he said, well, who knows whether there's any truth to this, but that he reacted well. Now, what I found notable about this is, first of all, I have, let me be very clear, Jamal, I have zero confidence, less than zero confidence in Donald Trump. The man lies as easily as he breathes. But,
Yes.
but the fact is, I've never, I mean, can you point to a single occasion on which he spoke this way? He didn't say anything about what wonderful beachfront property there is in Gaza. He didn't say anything in this exchange on Air Force One with these reporters about removing the people of Gaza, about the inability for them to survive in this demolition zone, as he's called it. All he talked about in this one exchange, and I think this is a first, is that there is enormous suffering amongst the civilian population. You have to get food and medicine to them. So why did he do this? Well, I think there's a lot of pressure points right now on Trump. First of all, and I'm not going to list them in any particular order, a poll just came out which showed that, amazingly, despite the unrelenting tide of propaganda, pro-Israel propaganda in the United States, 53% of Americans now have a negative view of Israel. And I can't remember the percentage that had a positive view. I think it was something like 15 or 20%. And then the rest were either unknown or in this kind of middle ground. This is extraordinary, given how much pro-Israel propaganda there is in the corporate media. Secondly, Israel is on the verge of internal collapse. You have this enormous conflict taking place between the judiciary and the Shin Bet and the military hierarchy in Israel on the one hand, and the Netanyahu regime and his genocidal psychopaths and his cabinet on the other. You have Yair Lapid saying that, the former prime minister of Israel, saying that soon we'll be in a place where there are going to be political killings in Israel, Jew killing Jew. Now, that has happened many times in the past, but the fact that he's giving voice to this concern is significant. We have a poll that just came out in Israel, which showed that 60% of Israelis believe that civil war is a serious possibility. We have the further depletion of U.S. military stocks. I'm sure that Trump is hearing about that. All these weapons that are being transferred to Ukraine and Israel over the course of the last several years is having a very negative impact on the ability of the U.S. government to wage war. Trump is looking desperately for any kind of a foreign policy win. Despite the savagery of the U.S. military in Yemen, the Yemenis bravely fight on. There's no meaningful, traffic in the Red Sea, maritime shipping traffic that serves Israel. They're continuing to fire missiles into Israel. The so-called peace negotiations relating to the Ukraine war are going nowhere fast. Trump is expressing his frustration with that. I think Trump is feeling a lot of pressure right now. And I don't think I don't believe he sees the world in the same way that Netanyahu does necessarily. Donald Trump looks out first and foremost for Donald Trump. And let's not forget that he put out that tweet, that Jeffrey Sachs tweet a few months ago, in which Jeffrey Sachs described Netanyahu as a deep, dark son of a bitch.
Yeah.
I think, Donald Trump is feeling some heat. I don't think he cares about Palestinians. But I just ask you to imagine this, and ask people who are listening to our conversation today to imagine this. What if we start seeing, and by the way, the World Food Program just confirmed that its warehouses in Gaza are now empty.
Yeah.
It has no further stores of food. What if we start seeing masses of people standing in the streets of Gaza, skeletal, looking like human ghosts, barely able to stand up, evoking images of the worst images from the Holocaust, the concentration camps in Europe from the Holocaust? What is going to happen then? I don't think we should discount the possibility of there being a violent social explosion in some major Western countries, including the United States. I think it's remarkable how peaceful the protests have been up until now, given the horrors that we have witnessed. But if there is mass starvation, people, of course, have died in Gaza because of malnutrition and starvation, including babies. But it doesn't appear to have happened yet on a mass scale, the kind of thing we saw during the Holocaust. If that happens, and we're on the verge of that happening, you may see a social explosion in the West, and or at least in certain parts of the West. I personally believe that that is privately causing significant concern to Western leaders. And then we have this, proceeding before the International Court of Justice. Let's remember that the International Court of Justice last year ruled that Gaza is occupied territory, even though Israel insists that it is not. That means Israel, as an occupying power, has an obligation under international law, an erga omnes obligation, to ensure that the needs the subsistence needs of the occupied population are met, and it is in fact destroying their ability to survive. So you're going to get, I would imagine, a very harsh opinion out of the International Court of Justice shortly. And all of this just adds to the growing pressure on Western governments to act. So
Just be
that's
clear,
my read, but I could be
I'm
wrong.
sorry to
Right?
interrupt. Please continue. I'm sorry.
No, look, trying to divine what's going on in the orange head of Donald Trump is a challenging task. So I could be completely wrong. This just could be some other inane commentary coming out of his mouth, which means nothing. But it could be a sign of him feeling some serious pressure.
That's fair. I accept that. I mean, you've listed all of those things, and all of those things are pressure points that are taking place. The trade war is another one that's happening. He has no wins in regards to international politics in general, right? Whether it's the Ukraine war, whether it's the trade war, whether it's what's taking place in Israel, that looks horrible. Everybody can see it on the social media thing. You're absolutely right. I guess I've gotten so accustomed to Trump not caring, like not giving an F about pretty much anything. And so, and as you pointed out, he lies as easily as he breathes. It's like he's amoral to the truth. He says whatever he has to say. Hey, what do you think about Gaza? Yeah, it's really horrible. The suffering is horrible. Hey, what do you think about Ukraine? Oh, the suffering is horrible. Here's more weapons. Here's more bullets. Here's more guns. Here's more, bunker busters. Oh, by the way, we're threatening Iran. Like, he put a Twitter post out, by the way, of people celebrating a religious holiday in Yemen with him bombing all of the people who are civilians. And he put that out on Twitter in this kind of like, look at what we're doing to the Houthis. You're just killing women and children and men, celebrating a thing. He doesn't seem to care. And it's like, certainly he knows that the 70 to 80% of the weapons, the bombs, the bullets, the things that he was sending to Israel, that they were bombing civilians primarily, whether it was in Lebanon, whether it was in Syria, whether it's in Israel, he has to know that. And maybe I'm overstating what Donald Trump knows, but certainly he knows bombs kill people. I don't know. I've become very callous in what I think of him and the things that he say. I don't add value to it. But you could absolutely be correct, and I could absolutely be wrong in this. And by the way, I hope you are correct in this.
Yeah, look, I don't want you to believe to think that I have a strongly held view about this, Jamarl.
Oh, that's fair.
Like I said at the very beginning, I have boundless skepticism about Donald Trump. But what really struck me about this, I look at the overall circumstances and the fact that I haven't heard this from him before. And I think there is a prospect that the man is starting to feel the heat about West Asia. And he's also got these negotiations with Iran going on. And I'm sure that the Iranians are telling his representatives, the whole problem here is that your rabid dog Israel knows no law, refuses to accept any boundaries on its behavior. That's the real problem here. And so the accumulation of all of these pressure points might actually, not that he cares about Palestinians, I don't believe that for 1 second, but he might actually be beginning to fear about his ability to implement his agenda because he's got no foreign policy wins and things are spinning out of control in the two major theaters of conflict, Ukraine and West Asia.
That's fair. How long does it take the ICJ to make a ruling? I thought it took several months.
In these I don't know exactly what they're going to do in these circumstances, but I wouldn't be surprised to see a ruling from them within a few weeks.
Okay.
And maybe even days. I wouldn't rule out that possibility either because of the urgency of the situation.
Yeah, they're out of food. I mean, you're talking about 2.1 million people that are out of food. And not to mention the videos that were coming out when there was some food that was in the people. God, man, the images are just like human beings like fighting just to get nourishment. It's disturbing, like to watch. You're absolutely right. And by the way, most of those are going to be kids. The skeletons, they will be roaming the streets, will be children for the most part.
Yeah,
that's a rough sight. I want to hit you with something else also. As you pointed out, the negotiations are taking place. Now, from my point of view, these negotiations have taken somewhat of a sinister turn. The first two negotiations led by Witkoff, and I can't pronounce his name, Agarchi, I believe, for the Iranians, the foreign minister for Iran. Those seem to be very positive. The way they were talked about, very positive. The third one seems to be more tense. And I pointed out to my audience in a video that I did that they've taken somewhat of a sinister turn. And what I meant by that is Rubio, in all of these negotiations, whether with Russia, whether with Iran, even when the negotiations were taking place with Israel, were sidelined. Like the State Department just wasn't part of it. And then all of a sudden, you see videos of Rubio coming out when a hard line starts to take shape. And you see Witkoff seemingly taking a back seat. Now, Witkoff was still running the negotiations, but the person who was doing the talking was Rubio. And what Rubio was saying was not what Witkoff was saying. Initially, when Witkoff went on Sean Hannity, Witkoff said something to the effect of, yeah, this is about them not getting a weapon. And this is about bringing down enrichment to 3.6%, I believe he said. Witkoff gets attacked for that. And he puts out a tweet saying, look, this is going to be a Trump deal. And they need to get rid of their nuclear centrifuges. Basically, what Netanyahu was effectively pointing out, a Libyan option. So you get now Marco Rubio coming out, giving the hard line. Well, we're okay with them having nuclear energy. And what he's not saying, though, under that is, as long as they don't have their centrifuges, meaning they got to import that from somebody else. And of course, from Iran's point of view, we're a sovereign state. Who the hell are you? Not to mention, how do we know we're going to get what we need from someone else? We want to have our centrifuges. This is a red line for us. But they went in knowing it was a red line. And now the Witkoff position has moved to what Rubio and some of the other Zionists are saying, you need to get rid of all your centrifuges. All right. So that was the third negotiation that at this point, they're at an impasse. They're bumping heads on this issue. What is your read on this? Because either one or two things is true. Either Trump really wants a deal, in which case he's going to allow some flexibility in the position, or this is a stalking horse to create a pretext by which to attack Iran. I don't know which one it is. What's your take on this?
Well, first of all, I think it's important not to assume that Trump knows what he wants. Okay, we oftentimes, the president knows he's the president. How can the president not know what he wants? Maybe he may not know. He may just be flailing around like an incompetent buffoon, which happens to be the interpretation that I think is most plausible. But putting that aside, Jamarl, let's just look at sort of, and I don't purport to be an expert in nuclear energy, but my understanding is this, okay? In naturally occurring uranium has the necessary continents for nuclear energy at the level of 0.7% on average, okay? In order to be able to operate a commercial nuclear facility, in general, you need, it depends on the type of nuclear facility that you have, enrichment to the range of 5%. And then if you want to have the ability to have research reactors, you have to enrich to the level of 20%. If you want to have nuclear weapons, you have to go apparently in excess of 90%. The Obama-era nuclear deal set the cap at 3.67%. Now, it's my understanding, again, I'm no expert, that given the nature of the nuclear facilities that Iran had, at that level, it could operate commercial nuclear reactors for peaceful civilian purposes. But if you take away entirely the enrichment capacity, you can't operate a commercial nuclear facility unless the enriched uranium is coming from an external source, for example, from the Russian Federation. In any event, all of this is kind of academic because what Israel is demanding, and in fact, Netanyahu reiterated this demand yesterday, is the complete dismantlement of Iran's nuclear program. He calls it the Libya option. And some of us are old enough to recall that Muammar Gaddafi agreed to surrender the nuclear program of Libya, the peaceful nuclear program of Libya, after which, of course, they overthrew his regime, destroyed the country, and sodomized the man to death. So I don't think that that's likely to inspire any confidence.
Excuse me, real quick.
Iran.
With the machete. They sodomized them with machete.
Yes,
I just wanted to point that out. It wasn't just sodomized. It was.
And as Hillary the Butcher said, you know, we came, we saw, we conquered, or whatever the hell she said. This is one of the most disgraceful moments in, modern Western imperialism. It was the most prosperous state in Africa. So Netanyahu, he keeps referring to Libya. He must know that the Iranians recoil in horror when they contemplate the possibility of having the same destiny as that of Muammar Gaddafi. And I think he knows perfectly well the Iranians aren't going to accept that. He said they're not going to accept it. In fact, not only are they not going to accept the complete dismantlement of their nuclear program, their civilian nuclear program, But they're not going to, they've said categorically, we're not going to give up the power to enrich ourselves. The only thing I think that is on the table from the Iranian perspective is the precise level to which they can enrich. Maybe they would be prepared to accept, I'm sure they would be prepared to go back to the Obama-era nuclear deal to avoid a war. So 3.67%, which is, as I understand it, pretty close to rock bottom if you want to be able to enrich to the level to have a commercial nuclear reactor. Maybe they'll go a little lower than that. And maybe they'll prolong the deal. Apparently, Trump was really upset that Obama's deal was only 10 years long. So maybe they'll make it 15. Maybe they'll make it 20, But I think that's as far as they're willing to go. And I think what this is really about, because let's remember that the U.S. intelligence agencies in the threat assessment they just issued for 2025 said they don't believe that Iran is trying to develop a nuclear weapon at all. So there's a real question about whether this has anything to do with nukes. I think what really is going on here is that they want to get rid of Iran's hypersonic ballistic missiles, and they want Iran some kind of ironclad constraint on Iran's ability to support the resistance. And these two are non-negotiable points. So there's one of two things going to happen here. These negotiations are going to fail, or Trump is going to have to shove down the throat of Netanyahu a deal that he hates. Netanyahu wants war. He's demanding things that the Iranians will never accept because he wants the negotiations to fail. And the question here is whether Trump is going to shove a deal down Netanyahu's throat. I don't know. I'm not confident that he will. I think more likely than not, and I would love to be wrong about this, we are headed towards war with Iran. I'm sure you know this, Jamarl, and I'm sure many people in our audience know this. There are a lot of people in the U.S. government who want a war with Iran. There are people in the Pentagon. There are people in the cabinet of Donald Trump. There are people in the intelligence community who want a war with Iran. So, Netanyahu has plenty of allies in the U.S. military and intelligence communities when it comes to war with Iran. Is Donald Trump going to stand up to all these people?
I mean,
I don't know.
Hired him. He put him in his cabinet, for God's sake. For me, I think people are policy. And consider for a moment what Donald Trump is doing to free speech. He's bastardizing free speech, right? He's kicking people out the country at the behest of a foreign government, which is just outrageous. He is trying to browbeat universities into going with some kind of Zionist, re-education. Again, for a foreign country. Again, outrageous. All of these things are anti-American. And I go back to Wesley Clark with this whole thing of taking down all of these Middle Eastern governments, with the last one being Iran. And Donald Trump has put in the most rabid, whack job, batshit crazy cabinet that I have ever seen in an administration. He surrounded himself by these people. And I suspect that part of the reason he keeps sidelining them is because they're lunatics. And he knows they're lunatics. And so he sends Wickoff to these meetings as opposed to a Rubio. I know Rubio was going to go to London. He pulled back. But I'm just saying Wickoff seems to be leading these meetings. He's bringing people onto the technical teams. The guy that used to work for Bush, who was part of, what is his name? Michael Anton. I hate to be cynical about it, but I have a hard time being cynical, not being that way, considering I've seen Afghanistan go down. I've seen Iraq go down. And he's using the exact same argument to take down Iran that they use for Iraq, weapons of mass destruction, despite the fact that our own intelligence assessments are saying they're not trying to get a weapons of mass destruction. And so is he putting a deal, once again, that he knows is going to fail in order to say, well, I did everything I could. I tried. They wouldn't work with me. We were being peacemakers. And so now we have to attack Iran. I don't know. I don't know if it's that. Oh, go for it.
I can't stress this enough. We can't assume that Donald Trump has a plan. We can't assume that Donald Trump has a clear objective. He may just be a complete incompetent buffoon who governs whimsically, and from one day to the next, his objectives, his aspirations, his plans change dramatically. That's entirely terrifying. My belief is that Donald Trump is fantastically incompetent, mind-bogglingly incompetent. All these people out there who are saying the man has, he's playing 5D chess. I heard somebody say the other day he's playing 5,000D chess. He's invented a form of chess that no one has ever heard of before. That's how brilliant he is. No, he's a buffoon. That's all the evidence is telling us. He's a buffoon. And I think he's going to end up stumbling in a buffoon-like manner into a full-blown war with Iran. And you know what? I don't think ultimately he will come to the. I think there's tension growing between him and Netanyahu for all the reasons I've articulated. But I think ultimately what is going to save the Palestinian people is going to be the collapse of the Israeli regime. And we can get into that if you want. But there's so many things going on in Israel right now which are pointing towards a collapse. And these and the Palestinians themselves are contributing to that through their incredible courage and resistance and their steadfastness. So that's where I think ultimately the salvation for the Palestinians will come from.
Let's go into that for a moment, because I am very curious about what is taking place in Israel. I mean, I would imagine they are in a pressure cooker with this war that has lasted for almost a year and a half, if not longer. You have troops that apparently don't want to fight. You have the religious community that don't want to fight. There's that. I think it's like 40% of people didn't show up for the conflict or show up to military service. Like, it is a pressure cooker. Many of the Palestinians at this point are either dead, but cannot do the labor that they were typically doing prior. And then it's like, okay, well, if that's the case, how is the state even keeping going? Like, where's the money coming from for the state? Dig into it for us. Give us some more context on this.
Well, one thing that is of importance is that the Israeli military has announced in the last, since Thursday, 4 dead soldiers, including a platoon commander, and 7 seriously wounded. Apparently, a couple of them, female intelligence officers who were in Gaza in a Jeep that got hit with an RPG, have had leg amputations happen. Wow. There are people, people in the Israeli military are being killed and maimed in a war for which there is no end in sight. Even the Israeli media and intelligence community are admitting that Hamas has managed to recruit thousands upon thousands of new soldiers, and I'm sure that they've been doing whatever they can to train them and arm them. There's all kinds of unexploded munitions, immense amounts of unexploded munitions all over Gaza, which the resistance groups have learned to repurpose into deadly weaponry for their own defense of the Gaza Strip. And then you have, as I mentioned, we didn't talk about it, but this psychodrama that's going on between Ronan Bar, the now fired head of the Shin Bet, the Attorney General of Israel, who's been fired because she said the firing of the head of the Shin Bet was a conflict of interest, which it clearly was, a brazen conflict of interest. Netanyahu, who hired the man who was basically in charge of the investigations into Netanyahu. How can that not be a conflict of interest, right? I could go on and on. And you have Avigdor Lieberman, this who's a genocidal racist as much as anybody, was saying recently, apparently, that Trump is fed up with Netanyahu. He was saying this publicly. And as I mentioned, you have Yair Lapid, Ehud Olmert, another former Israeli prime minister, warning about civil war. The economic damage being done to Israel. Israel is an international,
right.
I want to use the word pariah because apparently that has some racist connotations, but it is. Does it? I only learned this recently, but in any event, on the international stage, Israel has been utterly and thoroughly discredited. No one is going to forget in our lifetimes the monstrosities that we have seen during this period. Nobody with an ounce of conscience and a functioning brain. So I think that Israel, look, I said this at the beginning, Jamarl. I wrote an article in October 2023, said that the unsinkable aircraft carrier is sinking. And my argument was that Israel is heading to a strategic defeat. I remain absolutely convinced that that's the case. It's hard to believe it because we see Israel killing so many people with complete impunity. But we need to look at the deeper fatal weaknesses of this genocidal entity, the overall trajectory that it is on. And the trajectory that it is on is a strategic defeat, just as Ukraine is on such a trajectory, even though it's able to put up stiff resistance on various points of the contact line. Many people can now see that it's doomed. Israel too is doomed. If for no other reason than that Israel depends, as does Ukraine, for its very existence on Western support. And Western civilization is, I'm sorry to say, as a Westerner, heading towards a collapse. That's what's happening.
Dimitri, man, you are fantastic. Thank you for this. Like, I really do appreciate these conversations.
I wish I had better vibes to share with you, my brother, but unfortunately,
no. I mean, it's just honest. Like I don't. I don't believe for a moment Trump is playing 4D chess or 5D chess or whatever the hell kind of chess is it.
50,000 D chess.
There's a document called Path to Persia, and it outlines this: effectively negotiate and let Israel attack. And well, the U.S. says, well, our hands are clean because, we weren't the ones that did the attack. But the fact of the matter is they can't really attack without us anyway, nor would they attack without Trump's go ahead to do so. They're not going to alienate Trump in the way they alienate Biden if they do the attack. So between William Burns, between that document, yeah, I agree. I assume that at some point they're trying to set up a scenario. I think what they're missing, though, is that, be careful what you ask for, right? The guy may look like a victim, and he may not be a victim. In the same way that they thought Russia was Nigeria with snow, or Russia's, a gas can masquerading as a country, NATO got their ass kicked. And, this organization that had been around for like 50 years, that was gearing up for a war with the entirety of the Soviet Union, lost to the beating heart of the Soviet Union by itself. And so be very careful with this notion of, well, we can just attack Iran because they're a weak link. I don't think that's the case. I just really don't. I think we're undermining or undercounting their capabilities and what they can do, not just effectively to the attack, but when they respond, oh my God, then you have consequences. So we will see. I think you're right, unfortunately. I think you're right. I think he's incompetent. I think that's what we're doing. My man, thank you for this. I really do appreciate it. Let me just tell the audience where Dimitri Lascaris, lawyer, journalist, activist from Montreal, Quebec. By the way, where can people find your work, Dimitri?
My main gig nowadays is my YouTube channel, Reason to Resist. So it's Reason, the number 2, Resist, no spaces. And on Twitter, you can find me, X, you can find me with the handle @Dimitri Lascaris, again, no space or dot. And that's where I spend most of my time nowadays, fulminating about the horrors that we're witnessing. So it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Jamal. It really is. You're doing fantastic work, brother. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, man. I try. I keep puttering along. You have a good one, okay? Be safe. Enjoy Greece, by the way. Beautiful place. Have a good one, man. Be safe.
See ya.
All right. We have reached that point. We've had a fantastic show today. Everybody was great. All of the guests were awesome. Carl Shaw, Mark Sleboda, Dimitri. It was like a power show. So this was great. We got up to over 700 people live, and that's including Rumble, X, and Twitter, Rumble, Twitter, and YouTube. Damn it, Pluto's a planet. I'm still going with that. Let's see. We have chats today. Jino Choi, a member for a month. Jamal said Mark Sleboda, the streamer. I sent it to him. I got like a buzz saying, send Mark the link. And then I was like, send Mark the link. Thank you. Thank you, Jino Choi. I appreciate it. Here's another one. Crown Heights burnt. Mark needs the link. Everybody was like, Mark needs the link. Give Mark the link. I love my audience. Thank you for being willing to tell me that through one of these. Sparky, did the Russians use North Koreans, GMO super soldiers in the front lines? Who knows? Who knows? We all got that wrong. I will eat crow on that myself. I thought I was derisive against it. And maybe it's a good lesson. Maybe you shouldn't be derisive. Who the hell knows, right? I do say, though, to be honest, I'm a person. And as a person, I could be wrong. I accept that just as a basis of operation. So if I am wrong, I don't necessarily have an issue coming back and say, okay, I got that wrong. They kept that under wraps, big time. Like they just didn't say anything about it. And I think Mark is right. The fact that they didn't acknowledge it or deny it maybe should have been a heads up of, hey, it's kind of weird they're not denying that. It's just the other stuff that Ukraine makes up that gives me this kind of, let's say, doubt about the stuff that's coming out of the West and some of the things that they say. But I don't know if they use super soldiers, Sparky. I just, God, don't know. Here's another one for Sparky. Not long after RT America shut down, it seemed you were airing earlier, making me wonder if you were going fishing. In my grogginess, I forgot that I traveled west that night before Central. Oh, I see. You were in a different time zone. And because you were in a different time zone, the time was earlier. Fair enough, Sparky. No issue. Spark again. Anyway, Jamal, you're still killing it. Keep on trucking. I'm trying, man. One man band. I am imperfect. Hence, Mark not getting his link. And what's wild about that, when I send my links in the morning, I usually say, hey, here's your link is below. Thank you for joining me. Please join at X time, just so the person knows exactly the time that they're supposed to join. And the link goes below it. I put the first message, hey, thank you for joining me today. Your link is below. Please join at 8:15 with no link. And by the way, I've done that to KJ once, where KJ was like, where the hell is the link? And I put the simple email. I'm trying. I'm keeping on trucking. Who's the next one? Isaiah 99. Thank you, Isaiah. Thank you very much. Isaiah, I'm a fan of the show. Please report on the hero of Africa, Ibrahim Traore, and protest plan across Africa caused by General Langley, hashtag God's work. I've had a conversation with Kofi. I've been trying to get Kofi on the show. Kofi said he was in the bush. He said he was in the bush and outside of communication guidelines. I've just talked to him this morning. He is going to be on the show either tomorrow or Wednesday. Most likely it's going to be Wednesday because I think tomorrow's show is already booked. And I know I have a slot for Wednesday. So, yes, we're going to have the conversation. Apparently, there's a lot of pressure being put on him. He has been doing great work, from my understanding. Kofi is going to be able to give us more context on that. So, yes, I'm going to report on him coming up on Wednesday. All right. That is all of those in the bush. It was funny whistling in the wheat fields. Look, it's just funny. I've heard people use that term. Usually, I've never heard an African use that term, if that makes sense. It's just funny. It's like, I'm in the bush. And he meant it, though. He meant, like, in literal terms, like, I am in the bush. I am, in the deepest part of Africa where they don't have the communication set up. So shout out to Kofi. Kofi is awesome. He's cool people. And he explains that stuff so well. He really does. Especially when all of the stuff was happening in the Sahel region. And you had ECOWAS, like, literally threatening to go to war on behalf of France, former colonizer. And it's like, whoa, what? The white man is sending black people to go kill black people. That's astonishing that they'll do it. Aussies, I know the bush. Yeah, that's right. That's right. The dingo ate my baby. That type of stuff. All right. I'm going to end this. We have come to the end. It is a few minutes before Bubblesby Brown. Good morning, Jamal. He's coming from Rumble. Shout out to you. I've been trying to get a Rumble presence. So I've been doing all of these videos on Rumble also. I do not cut them up on Rumble, but I have the main show also on Rumble. So shout out to you, Bugsby Brown. When I forgot to air it on Rumble the other day, I got a hit from my mom saying, hey, they want you to put it on Rumble. Don't forget the link. So there are people who apparently watch. So flat out, all fantastic. Summer S, having your allies on your territory is nothing unusual. Exactly. Look, the U.S. has a weird, hypocritical angle that it sells to its own public that makes no sense if you are sitting on the moon looking at events. From their point of view, they can dump every weapon system in the world into Ukraine to kill Russians, and they can even point to where those people get killed and use intelligence satellites and all of this other stuff to do so and prosecute a war. You can have all sorts of mercenaries that fight along the Ukrainians in this particular war. Russia has a security treaty with North Korea to give defense. North Koreans wanted training in order to see what its modern war is like. By the way, the same thing, some of the Europeans who are mercenaries were coming to the front lines and fighting for Ukraine in order to see for themselves. Also, Denmark, there's an article talking about Denmark saying, hey, we want to get battlefield training by going into Ukraine. Okay, those people are going to die, but fair enough. Good luck with that. I'm just pointing out that the North Korean soldiers wanted training. They were allies in this case, and so they joined the battlefield. I don't have an issue with it. It's just, I got it wrong. That's my only issue with it. And it's funny to me that Mark said, I know people who were on the battlefields and they would not tell. They kept it to themselves. Kept it to themselves. Yeah, the Russians wouldn't acknowledge it. They wouldn't acknowledge it. They didn't deny or acknowledge. So there was that. So fair enough. But no, it's not unusual. That's not our issue. The issue is we got it wrong more than anything else. Who else is here? Pittsburgh Dude 87, Alexander Black, Cypher Agent, Joe Sachs, Ike Einsek Seiben. Greetings from Germany. Fair enough. I tried. I went for it. Open to public soon. Lawsuit pending. North Korea, World Police, Charles G. Well, they were only fighting in Kursk because it's Russian territory. They didn't go outside the territory. Yeah. Dimitri Lascaris. Dimitri, try to do the live today. Rampelson 01. Good show, good guest. Thank you, man. I appreciate it. I try. Oh, we have another super chat. Sparky. Though skeptical, the Duran painted out from the start that Russia hadn't denied the North Korea soldiers stay. That is true. That is true. That is true. Look, I have been derisive about it. So yes, I'm going to eat crow on that story. Fair enough. Fair enough. I was completely derisive. Like, okay, where are they? Where are they? Because what they were showing you, there was no evidence for it. Like, and maybe the fact that the Russians wouldn't deny it was the evidence in a weird way. They would show you somebody of Asian descent that was part of the Russian territory and act like the person was a North Korean. That's not evidence. And Ukraine saying it is damn sure not evidence. So it puts you in this kind of weird spot of, okay, this is like the ghost of Kiev again. This is like Russia is fighting with shovels again. This is like Russia blew up its own pipeline again. Like you can go story after story after story where they just made this shit up. And so that's where my position came from. Regardless of where the position came from, I was wrong. So that's all that matters. I was wrong. I was wrong. I accept it. Crow swallowed and eaten. Crow swallowed and eaten. All right. I'm going to end this. I want to thank all of you for watching. I want to thank all of you for joining. We had a damn good crowd today. Like I said, we got up to over 700, I think 700 and some change. That is fantastic. And we kept that crowd all the way through the entirety of the show, which means people were engaged the entire time. That is also fantastic. Thank all of you. Thank all of you who gave and donated to the channel. It helps the channel out immensely. Like I said, it's a one-man band. I'm trying to keep this together on my own. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. I'm going to say subscribe. I'm trying to think, is there anything else? Oh, if you want to support the content, you can do so through PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, Super Sticker, memberships. All of those things help out. All of that stuff is below at the very bottom. The black chain, those who are asleep, what? Everybody's crazy about a sharply dressed man. Alexandra Black, I appreciate that. I got to get another suit. Where I am, I guess I'll have to explain that later. But thank you. I appreciate that. I always think it's cool to be a well-dressed man playing chess. For some reason, I think it's badass. It's like a man in a impeccably dressed suit, just move pieces. That's how they used to do in the old days, right? It's like you didn't play chess in sweats. You came in a suit, formal attire, and you sat down and real men doing real men's work, playing the game. Now, I know women can play chess, so fair enough. I think the WGM title is ridiculous. Women like just as good as men. They're not lifting weights. But people in suits, people impeccably dressed used to come and sit down and play. I used to like it like that. All right, I'm going to call it a day. I'm going to say like, share. I'm going to say subscribe. And I will see you guys later tonight, maybe. What's today? Today's Monday. Okay, so Garland and I are probably going to do our show later tonight. So I will see you then, or later this evening. You all have a good one, all right? Be safe. Signing off.